how did you get started with all this?
I didn't come into this world the way everybody else does, I don't think. I used to think that everybody had the similar experience, but like if I asked you what was your first memory in life, what would it be?
I don't think I know.
My first memory was almost like when you're dreaming and you're falling and you hit the bottom and you wake up.
Mm-hmm.
That was my first memory, but I didn't wake up here. I was inside my mother's womb. And I was about maybe 6 months inside the womb. And I'm like, okay, don't forget I'm here. Okay. Don't forget. You go to sleep. You wake up again. Now something's moving in front of you. And you're like, oh, that's my friend. But I had a different name for it. I didn't know it was my hand. But I knew I had a title for it. Go back to sleep, all of those things. Then ultimately you get ready to come out. I remember all of that.
You remember coming out?
Remember being compressed, and you want to panic, but you're flooded with like some serotonin and dopamine to where you feel relaxed. You go right back to sleep. You remember being born. I remember being circumcised. I remember the whole nine. And the proof of it was when my wife, Mira, that you just met, when she was 6 months pregnant with my son, Kieran, I wanted to prove to her what I was talking about. So I put a light on her stomach every day at 6 o'clock at night. And I would move that light back and forth, and I'd put a song on for a week straight. On Saturday, after a week, I didn't put the light there, and I didn't do the music. And he pushed up on her stomach. And then when I put the light there, he started following the light. And for the next 2 months, we did this every night, and he would go all the way around her belly, back and forth, always pushing on it. I didn't understand at the time that maybe I've interfered with the development process, and maybe he's wrapped the cord around his neck. I shouldn't have done all of this, but he came out wonderful and fine. And this little boy, first thing he wanted to do is see light. He loved lights from that early stage, and I can ask him the square root of 2, the square root of 5, the square root of that, the square root of pi, and he will run it off. But he's just like, his personality is like Forrest Gump, to where he's just loving and wants everybody to be around him and care. But for me, that's where it started, in there. And then when I was about 5 years old, I had another dream, and the room filled up with like this fluid, a dark fluid, and I could see the ripples of it moving around, and there was a being there, and I remember being walked through that fluid with him, and I was trying to look up at him, and I couldn't turn my head to look at him, and he had his hand straight. I knew his voice, but I did not know who it was, but I felt confident and comfortable. And as we moved along this dark blue fluid path with like chartreuse covering the, how when you look into a pool and you see the ripples, and if you're at the bottom of the pool, you'll see the ripples overlapping. That's what it looked like. And then when we got to the end of it, he said to me, if you could have anything in the world, what would it be? Now, we were really poor. My dad had just gotten out of prison, for manslaughter. I didn't have much, but I said to him, I want to know how everything works. And at that moment, he used his left hand and he opened up the door. And there was this mansion, big brown doors. And inside of it was these crystalline flowers. Big crystalline flowers, like a giant, like 5 feet across. And every time I tried to see his face, he would reach in and hand me another shape. And I was so fascinated with the shapes because they didn't look like the platonic solids. They didn't look like anything I'd ever seen before. And he would hand me these shapes, and each shape was different and amazing. And I woke up from that dream. But after that moment, anytime something strange would happen in a dream, I had the powers of inception. Anytime something, I would be naked at school, I would say, I'm not naked. I must be dreaming. And immediately I would run out of the school or run out of wherever I was, and I would find that mansion again. And I had access to all the knowledge. The proof of it is the 97 patents that I have now. The proof of it is the industries that I've innovated. It's like waking up, having a dream that you have a diamond in your hand, and out of nowhere, you wake up and you're hoping you're holding it, and you try and hold it, and it's gone when you wake up. But the proof is all the stuff that I've been able to do now.
So all these thoughts are from the time you were a baby. These are not things that you've learned. These are things that you had in your mind from the time you were born.
From before that time, because I remembered that I had been someplace else before. Now, what's interesting, that voice that I heard, that's my voice now. So it was like my greater self was leading me through, and periodically would show up again in other dreams. And I went off and became an actor because my mother wanted my little brother to be an actor, and I thought if I became an actor, I would get my mother's affection. It wasn't until my mother was dying, and I'm talking to her, and she told me the reason that she was babying Antonio was because he had asthma, and my father always had questioned whether it was his son or not because he looked so much like her family and didn't look so much like him. And I realized, my God, if I had followed my proper course, I could have saved my mother, because the knowledge that I had, I had the grand unified field equation. I had already put that together, and at 7, 8, I was working with these things, and then I went through all of the hell that I had to go through. Being accused of domestic violence, all of those things, and I thought it was a curse at the time, but it was really removing me from advancing down the wrong path. And during that period of time, I started waking up in my dreams again. And I started going back into that palace. And I remembered all of these things, and I started patenting them. As I moved along, I got in touch with Michael Hudak. He was the president of the University of Science and Philosophy, because I was studying a guy named John Keeley, who had worked with frequency back in the 1870s, had built the first what do they call it? Self-sustaining engine. Back in 1872, but he wouldn't tell people how he built it. And I was watching a program with Del Pons, and somebody in the audience said, doesn't John Keeley's work remind you a lot of Walter Russell? And a bell went on. And so I got in touch with the University of Science and Philosophy after watching some stuff about Walter Russell. And Michael Hudak, took me under his wing and started talking to me, but he was more into the philosophy and the love that Walter was talking about. But my intention was to rebuild the periodic table, build a new periodic table, because the stuff I had learned in college, I went to school for chemical engineering the first year over at Pratt. And at the time, I think it was like 108 elements. And I told the teacher, the professor, about the relationship between hydrogen on the spectrometer and carbon and silicon and cobalt. And I was like, it's the same exact color, same tone, just doubled in each octave. And he was like, no, each element is the same element and it will always be that element. And I was like, you don't see the relationship. So I left school, and I was going to spend 40 years rebuilding the periodic table, and I found out that Walter Russell had already did that. And he did it based upon the natural curvature of everything.
And when you say rebuild the periodic table, what do you mean specifically?
Well, the way the periodic table is laid out, the periodic table they have now,
Let's see.
It looks like a
Pull up
box.
an image of it.
It looks like a straight box.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't show the relationship that between every element, there's two
All right, here's the periodic table.
you'll see hydrogen sitting all the way over there by itself, but they don't show that hydrogen has the same tone as carbon.
What do you mean by tone?
Same tone, same key of E. Same key of E. 40.5 hertz. The next one would be like 81 hertz. You go to silicon, it will double up and would be 162 hertz. You'll go to cobalt, and it'll be 324 hertz. It's, in that base, if you were to take the angles of incidence or the tones that they create, their color. Like you can turn color back into sound based upon, it's the same wavelength, it's just twice as long or much longer. So all you have to do is keep dividing light by 2.
Keep that up, Jimmy.
You keep dividing light by 2, and you'll ultimately get back to the audible sound of it, because there was a relationship between light and color, sound and tone, matter and shape. I put, I sent over Walter Russell's.
I was trying to get to that. That's what.
Yeah, it's Walter Russell's periodic table that he put together. Now you compare that to what Mendeleev's periodic table. You'll compare Walter Russell's to it, and you'll see something completely different. It's unwinding.
Whoa.
It's unwinding. And you see there's a relationship that hydrogen.
So you had figured this out at a young age?
I had already seen this. This was all inside of that palace. I had access to it, and I knew the relationship.
So you saw this in dreams?
I saw it as a circle. Everything was a full circle laid out, and each area was just expanding, like wrapping a rag around your hand. The first wrap, it's so tight. The very first wrap is so tight. That's the first one that Walter Russell did, yeah. But go back to the wiggly one. This is how I saw it more so, but as a vortex. But you'll see there's a relationship between hydrogen, carbon, silicon, cobalt, rhodium. They're all bonded. They all sit as the middle point between two noble gases. So those things don't really exist. It's only one substance. Now the problem is, the first thing that we're able to perceive is hydrogen. That's the first visible element, because before it is too dense for us to perceive it. You understand what I'm saying?
Okay.
But as you reach into the next octave, the carbon octave, and they call that a bisexual tone, because the carbon has 2 tones to it. It has a negative side and a positive side. The part where lithium behaves, lithium is contractive. Beryllium is contractive. Boron is contractive. But the moment you get to carbon, you balance it out. It gets to a perfect balance of plus and minus 4. So it's a double tone. Then nitrogen is minus 3,1. minus 3, oxygen is minus 2, fluorine is minus 1. Now the balance of this, all of those are mates. Fluorine and lithium naturally mate. If you have lithium bonded with any other element, the moment that fluorine is introduced, it will break all bonds violently so it can bond with fluorine. Same thing with beryllium and oxygen. That's why it said, and what they've tried to keep from us, if you want to break water into its component parts of hydrogen and oxygen, all you have to do is introduce beryllium or the sound of beryllium. And oxygen will violently break away from any other thing, even hydrogen, to bond with that beryllium. And now you can have it just with the frequency of it. And since the hydrogen is smaller, hydrogen will, that waveform, you can send that up into one tube, the oxygen into another tube, without using electrolysis, without using heat. It was just through frequency. And the proof of it, if you go back up just a little bit higher, we know the relationship between sodium and chlorine. They're equal and opposite mates. If you get out of the pool and you got chlorine and you're itching from the chlorine, all you have to do is get some real salt and rub that on your skin, and it'll turn right into an oil. It naturally neutralizes each other. So everything has an equal and opposite mate. The lithium becomes sodium in the next octave, doubles the same exact tone, just doubled and wider. The sodium becomes potassium in the next octave, widens up. The reason that arsenic kills us is because our DNA has nitrogen and it has phosphorus in it, because nitrogen unwinds into the next octave right after silicon and becomes phosphorus. Our DNA has both of those in there, but it's going by tone. So the moment arsenic, which sits as a -3 on the next octave, the moment arsenic is introduced, the body thinks that, oh, this is my thing that I need. And it tries to wrap itself around the arsenic, but it causes the DNA to unravel because it's 4 times as large as that nitrogen was. And those other little elements, titanium, vanadium, chromium, magnesia, and iron, all of those aren't true elements. Those are isotopes. Those things, those first 3 are the full tones. They make full spheres. But now it becomes elliptical with titanium, vanadium, and chromium. And on the other side, it's like when, like I said, if you wrap the rag around your hand, the first wrap, really tight. You can't get much out of it. Second wrap, you damn near can't see the difference of it. Third one, you start seeing hydrogen. The fourth wrap, you see carbon. I need a piece of paper or a rag, and I can show you that twist. But in between each one of them, by the time you get, nature does not allow us in the silicone octave for there to expand out. But there is the same titanium, vanadium, chromium, magnesia, and iron that exists between aluminum and silicone. But nature doesn't allow us to unravel that. But now with the wave conjugations, we can. We couldn't do that before because we didn't know the angles of incidence that were necessary to open these things up. And you couldn't do that with the platonic solids because the platonic solids were averages and approximations. They, like I've said a number of times, you show me a real straight line in nature. If everything in the universe, everything is expressed in motion, all motion expressed in waves, all waves were curved. Every action has an equal and opposite reaction. So the greater the action, the greater the reaction. The greater the reaction, the greater the resistance. The greater the resistance, the greater the curvature. Because the universe is based off of equanimity, which Einstein left out in his theory of relativity, the balancing side of the gravity was caused by electric force. Electricity is always seeking a higher pressure condition. It spins northeast, is trying to get to the center of an area, the center of a cone. But the next electric wave is coming, so it gets pushed out, and as it's pushed out, it gets to the vortices. And that's on those pieces, those vortices. Now, instead of it spinning northeasternly, centripetally, it's forced to spin centrifugally, and it spins southwesternly. And it expands itself out, it decays, it keeps decaying until you get 4 magnetic waves that hit each other at 120-degree angles. At that point, they reconvert back into the electric field, and then they make their way back to their source again, whether it's the star, whatever star it came into. What happens when we get older? We expand at our equator, right? We get shorter at the top. Why? Because the electric force is pushing in and condensing, and the magnetism expands out at the equator. The electron field, the electrons, that's just discharged electricity, devitalized electricity, coming from the sun, coming from the earth. It's the waste product from it. But it hits our magnetic field, and then it gets pulled right back in and gets compressed again, and now it becomes electricity for the earth, and then it pushes itself right back out again at the equator. The equator is 5 miles wider than the poles. Electricity, Einstein left that out of his equation because he coupled electricity and magnetism together and didn't realize that electricity was the equal and opposite of magnetism. Electricity being the contractive field. You breathe in, that's a contractive thing. You breathe out, that's a magnetic thing, a radiative thing. But they use the term magnet as an attractor. But to magnify something means to what? Make it larger, increase the space. That's the work of radiation. That's what Walter Russell was talking about all those years. That's the work of radiation. It's the electricity between the things that pull them together. The Coulomb force that supposedly opposites attract and push each other away. If that was true, then hot air and cold air would seek each other out. They're the same substance, but but in a different state. They move in opposite directions from each other. Hot water and cold water move in opposite directions from each other. The reason two magnets seem like the North Pole is attracted to the South Pole, because if you had two rivers or two hoses with water coming out of them, and you pointed them at each other, what are they going to do? They're going to be pushing against each other. But they align to where the male enters the female and is able to come out. So they've been fooled by their senses. They've been fooled by their eyes and have missed the whole picture of it. Are you familiar with Khalil Gibran?
Yes.
He wrote a book. He wrote The Prophet, in 1923, but he wrote another book called Sand and Foam. In that book, he told a story of a man who had been away from his family for 4 months working, and he was excited to come home. And as he was coming home, he knew that the mountain, when he saw the mountain, that he was close to home. So his five senses started having a conversation, and his eyes says, I see a mountain, I see a mountain, I see a mountain. And so the ears perked out and said, I don't hear a mountain. The nose sniffed and said, I don't smell a mountain. The tongue tasted the air. I don't taste a mountain. And the other four senses started speaking among themselves, and they came to the conclusion that there must be something the matter with the eye, because they couldn't perceive it. But all of these things, we've been misled just because we've been fooled by our senses. Our eyes see 0.05% of the entire electromagnetic wave. We're blind cosmically, but we judge everything by what we see. And they've done that with science for so many years. You look at E = mc squared. That talks about expansion. It does not show how it's divided. You've never breathed in twice without breathing out. You breathe in and you breathe out. You charge and you discharge. So how is it that the breathing in, they're acting as if the universe is just expanding out, breathing out, and it's going to dissipate out, and they never include the contractive side of it, breathing in, because they were misled by Newton, who said everything moves in a straight line unless affected by something else. And we know that not to be true. But they built the entire two-dimensional plane, the Euclidean space that we live on, that we work on, that we try and define curved nature by two-dimensional space, and we never include the curvature, the breathing in. Like Alan Watts said, no one would be attracted to a Euclidean woman because she would just be straight, all straight lines. It's the wiggliness, it's the curvature that brings the balance. Everything has to have the balance, the electric side and the magnetic side. I can talk about it, but I can show you even better. If you can...
Can I stop you there? The concept of the periodic table, the way the periodic table conventionally is addressed, do they address these things as being isolated or intertwined?
They interact, but they feel that carbon will always be carbon, and it will have its half-life and keep breaking down, but it still be carbon. They don't understand that it unwinds and becomes nitrogen. Nitrogen unwinds and becomes oxygen.
So the periodic table, the conventional use of the periodic table, and what is this other gentleman's name again?
Walter Russell.
Walter Russell. Walter Russell's version of the periodic table. How is Walter Russell's version of the periodic table perceived by people who study this?
Well, now everyone wants to use it. If you can go to in my book, there's a picture of Einstein reading Walter Russell's first book, second book, The Universal One. Because when Walter wrote this in 1926, he sent it out to 300 different universities and physicists. And one of the quotes that Einstein says on his deathbed, I should have spent more time reading Walter Russell's work. That's how, and now they're taking it under their wing. But remember the Michelson-Morley experiment from 1887? They were trying to prove whether there was an ether or an effect of an ether, or the quintessence that everything came from. That used to be called the fifth element, that everything that from antiquity, everyone understood that something doesn't come out of nothing. It's like when you look at the air, it looks clear, but you change the pressure condition. The balance of the change of pressure condition, we call that condensation. It creates clouds. And you change the motion conditions, whether it's moving quickly or slowly, it's going to become snow, it's going to become rain, it's going to become hell. So everything comes down to just one of two forces. Either you're breathing in and filling up something, or you're pouring it out. But the scientists, they ignored Walter Russell's work because he didn't include any equations inside of it. He talked philosophically regarding how things behave in comparison to laying down and following some Newtonian or calculus writing. You know, he said he based things based on let's explore them naturally. And that's what I did with my book. Once what Walter Russell was missing, he didn't have the wave conjugations. He didn't have the mirror shapes, the all shapes. And that was because of a mistake that was made 6,000 years ago, maybe. They took the flower of life, which was that symbol. Mm-hmm. If you could go to my book, tcotlc.com, there's an example that I put in there on page 64. And I show the period, I show the element, the fundamentals. If you could possibly pull that up, Jamie.
What was that .com again? TCLTC?
TCOTLC.com. You'll see in there the mistake that they made because they believed in straight lines, because the church was promoting the idea of straight lines. You just tap on right below there. There's, download. No, just go to the center of the page and right above that, and you see initial public draft, just tap on it. And if you go to page 64, on the right side of the page, right there, on the left side of the page, you'll see the 5 Platonic solids. Now these, all of our axioms, all of our postulates have been built off of these things. This is what Euclid went down to Egypt and pulled these things together. Pythagoras worked on them. And these were the undisputed fundamentals of God that he used to build. If you tap onto the flower of life, Platonic solids things, it's going to take you to a video. Turn it, don't have to tap it. But it'll show you the flower of life that they took this from. But you'll see that instead of following the natural curvature of these 64 circles overlapping, they averaged the space where they met. And they invented straight lines.
Why did they do that?
Because they believed that the world was flat. They believed the world was flat at the time. And the church promoted. Pythagorean theorem comes off of this cube, a squared plus b squared equals c squared.
So they wanted to use all of these intertwining circles and create straight lines.
Because that's how they thought everything came down, to straight lines. They thought the world was flat. And I was like, oh my goodness. they didn't open the flower properly. So the next one would be the icosahedron.
Now, the flower of life, it's very, very old. The concept is very old. What was the origin of the concept?
It's the oldest symbol known to mankind. It's believed that it was Anki, the brother of Enlil, if you go by the Emerald
Sumerian
tablets,
text.
the Sumerian text, that was the one that created mankind. Because if you look at mankind, and there's a point I want to make with it. I want you to stay on the book, go to 134 on the book. And this is what that other gentleman being told me to do. He said, why don't you just take the pieces that make up the flower and put them together based on universal ratios. So if you once you're able to pull it up.
164?
Page 134. 134 in the book. So this is the juxtapose of the mistake they made. Yep, just tap right onto that. Yep, just tap on it. Now, this was made by David Johnson, one of our programmers, Argos Fuel. So if you go to the far left and tap on that, I took 4 of those triangles. And wow. And you can scroll around. This is what happens when 4 bubbles meet. This is the negative space where they can't touch each other. This is hydrogen. And as I was saying, electricity is always trying to get to the center of that triangle, but it gets pushed out. And now you see it has 4 contractive poles, which is the electric poles. Just go around it from like horizontally, yeah. It has 4 contractive poles because electricity is seeking a higher pressure condition and forcing it in, where magnetism is seeking a lower pressure condition and spun out. So the vortices, those tips, that's the magnetic field. That's where they begin. But it has an equal attractor and an equal amount of repulsion. So if you go to what happens when 8 bubbles meet, they gave me the patents to that. I called that the tetrahedron. So this is
the negative space in between 8 bubbles.
8 bubbles. This is the negative space where 8 bubbles meet, and you can scroll around.
And this is ignored when they're concentrating on straight lines.
Completely, because if you look from the top, I haven't violated anything. It fits perfectly inside of there. But this is the negative space where 8 bubbles meet, but you'll notice it has 8 contractive poles, but it only has 6 magnetic poles, 6 vortices, so it has a greater electrical potential than a repulsion. So maybe this is the strong nuclear force, and the previous one was the weak nuclear force. So I was like, okay, I called this the Huntian after my son. So I was like, what happens when 6 bubbles meet? If you'll go to the one right in the center. Now you see that it has these huge bubbles, fast moving, but there's 6 strong spheres that's going around this, but the greater attractor has grabbed the 2 weaker attractors. And this looks just like a photon, and guess what? It has 30 poles. What is the speed of light? 299,752,400 something. They rounded off to 300 million kilometers per second squared. But if you look at it from the top, you'll see that I haven't violated anything. This looks like what happens in nature. So I was like, okay, so they gave me the patents to this, but you'll see that there's 6 unaccounted electrical poles to it. So I was like, what happens when 12 bubbles meet if you go to the one right next to it? Another stable structure that we basically see in nature, but there's 4 unaccounted electrical poles to it. 4 spin around it. You can count those 4. You'll see 1 at the bottom and 3 on those sides. This is the basis of crystallization, laws of crystallization that forms. And you can go to the last one. I was like, what happens when 24 bubbles meet? This is the negative space. If you pull to a horizontal on it, this is a negative space where 24 bubbles meet. This is where you cannot distinguish this from the background because all of the electrical potential has been accounted for. This would be the Bose-Einstein condensate, where something becomes indistinguishable from the fabric of space itself, the final state of matter. And the proof of this, the platonic solids they have a thing called discrete symmetry. You can put the cubes together, maybe you can put the dodecahedrons together, but you can't put all of them together. But you can take the wave conjugations right here, and they form supersymmetrical systems where everything aligns. So there's a site that James sent over to you, and this will be the final thing, and then I'll be quiet for a second. But because this is the final, this right here. Now these are other sculptures I've built. There's a video, and you'll see that flower. If you'll pop it up from Terry's linchpins that he sent you, you'll see, and this is one of 4 supersymmetrical systems that I patented. And the reason I patented it was because when Walter Russell put his stuff up, yep, just go down a little bit, and we're going to get to gravity. Not that one. We're going to get to gravity in a second. Not that one. We're not even there yet. There, Tetratarian wave conjugations. Now, these are all of those systems put together. This is where 12 bubbles meet, the Aubrians. Mm-hmm. And then I put 5 of them together, and they make these natural starfish. But then when I put 10 of them together, they lay themselves out, and they predict all distribution of matter within the electric field. And you can see where 6 bubbles meet as you get to a higher point on it. Those where 6 bubbles are meeting, still fitting perfectly where the 12 bubbles are meeting, and where the 4 and where the 8. That's a super symmetrical system. I put 12. If I put 20 of those where 6 bubbles meet, the Antonians, they make a natural dodecahedron that's naturally curved. If I take where the 12 bubbles meet, that's where I made the linchpin from. Ultimately from some of those pieces you got right there, that all shape of it. So that was one of the first things. But when Walter Russell came out with his book and he introduced his periodic table, he watched as different people went up and collected Nobel Prizes for deuterium, for tritium, for all these things that he had discovered. And I was like, okay, let me wait until the patents are granted before I'll talk about it, so that they won't be able to stop it. But what makes more sense? Where they invented straight lines in opening the flower, or where you actually take the individual pieces of the flower and put it together based on universal ratios? Which one do you think is how the givers of that knowledge intended for us to use it?
Well, it makes sense because you're accounting for the negative space and the straight lines are not.
Bingo.
Yeah, that it must be something. And so, and then these are all physical representations that you've created?
Yep.
That are all of those things?
Same things. That's the Aubrian right there.
How is this received? Like when you talk to people about this?
Oh, man, they first, because I hadn't shown them, I introduced it with, let's talk about our fundamentals are a little bit off. There are no straight lines.
Right.
So I reached out to Neil deGrasse Tyson. I saw him at an event up front, at Fox. And he was like, hey, man, yeah, I'd love for you to come on my show, do my radio, do my TV thing. I would love that. I was like, yeah, but I've got something I want to introduce to you. And it was only 36 pages. It was a treatise. And I told him it was controversial. And I sent him over the 36-page thing that had the wave conjugations in it. But I started it off with 1 × 1 = 2. And he went in on my treatise, redlined everything. He attacked that I had talked about Walter Russell and Victor Schauberger and John Keeley and Tesla as the people that I looked up to. Mm-hmm. He attacked them, but then he started attacking, the 1 × 1 = 2.
How did he attack them?
Oh, he was because I asked him. I said, under what conditions? I said, it's illogical where the square root of a number added to itself will equal more than that number squared. But that's what happens with the square root of 2. That's what happens with most of the numbers. I was like, how is it that multiplication If it means to make more and increase in number, how is 1 times 1 equaling 1 part of the multiplication table? Now, I understand that if you're seeing it one time,
Right.
but we call that once. But the moment that you add the times in there, that multiplicative indicator, that means there's more than 1. So now each equation is supposed to be balanced. That equal sign is supposed to show that there's a balance between these 2 numbers over here and a balance on this 1 over here. What happened to the other 1 in this equation? It didn't equate. And then I took the square root of that number. I took the square root of 2, because all this started in 3rd grade. I was arguing with my teacher because we were talking about the square root of 100. Oh, my God.
Is that your phone?
Yeah, that's my detox thing. I'm supposed to detox right now.
How do you detox? You detox on a timer? What do you do?
There's my wife got me these things, because I'm supposed to take this.
What is that?
And
Pure Body Extract.
And there's another one.
Advanced Daily Cellular Detox. What's in this? Oh boy. I
And this too.
What's in this stuff?
Just things to counteract the natural the metals that we have in our bodies that wear us out.
And you just take these periodically throughout the day on a timer?
I got to do it now. I got to do it.
Okay.
Now. I take a dropper, part of that dropper, and then 4 sprays, and it removes the parasites from your system, like oil of oregano, like using oil of oregano instead of using antibiotics.
And have you felt an effect?
Yes.
Yeah? What do you feel when you take this stuff?
I used to have really thick, dark circles under my eyes. That's gone away in the last 6 months. I've been using that. My skin, I'm 55 years old. I'm 55 years old and I smoke. Do I look like I'm 55 years old?
No, you don't. You look great. And do you think that's because of this?
I think, well, I'm going to show you a picture of what I used to look like when my wife met me. And I don't know if you could... She'll be mad if I throw this up, but she's a beautiful one. But this is what I looked like when my wife met me. I was 256 pounds.
Were you eating differently?
I was, well, now I'm intermittent fasting. I follow her routine, but she turned me from that into this. It's like she shined up.
Yeah, you look about 15 years younger now.
Yeah, and that's because of her. I still smoke my cigarettes.
Why do you do that?
I'm a crackhead. I don't know. Everybody has to have some vice. Like Alan Watts said, you got to have some balance of beneficence and rascality to you.
We have a fan in here, by the way. If you wanted to smoke in here, you're more than welcome to.
I don't trust people, that walk around, people get so offended by gurus a lot of times and yogis because they think they're these calm and passive people, and when they get angry, they're like, oh, that was a directed anger. That was a purposeful anger to wake you up to something. And then they find out they have a girlfriend. They find out that they smoke, and they're like, oh,
Vices.
This is a lie.
Right.
But that's the real person. That's what I loved about Alan Watts. He had a wife, and he had his mistresses. He ended up dying with one of his girlfriend and his wife, off in his little place. But he spoke the truth. He was honest. Life is about the give and take. There's a balance in there,
To be human is to be flawed.
It's to be beautiful.
Yeah, it's part of the beauty of us. And it's part of why we create. I don't think you create from a perfect place of enlightenment. I think part of the chaos of being a human being is the beauty of the creation. It's why we create. The most fucked up people, the best artists are some of the most fucked up people. My favorite musicians, my favorite comedians, my favorite actors.
Yep.
Almost all of them are fucked up.
Yeah, my uncle used to call it, he said, if you don't get any flower to grow unless you throw some shit on it.
So back to Neil deGrasse Tyson and his critique of
So
Tesla.
he threw shit on he was like, well, Tesla stuff worked, but Tesla was never really respected and out there, and I guess he wanted me to support Bohr or Schringer or Feynman or any of those people. And I'm looking at the Feynman diagrams. I'm like, you made all these things up. You're basically doing the Mr. Spock thing. If you want to find the answer to something, then you cancel out all the possibilities, all other possibilities, and you root it down to one thing. So that means going through the whole universe to answer one question. And that's the problem with probability. That's the problem with Heisenberg uncertainty. That's the problem with Schrodinger. All of those were just these probabilities because they had taken the ether out. They forgot the electromagnetic wave. Mm-hmm. It had to have a medium in which it followed on. It had to have something in which it was moving on.
They don't exist in isolation.
No, they do not. And it cannot be the cause of its own action. An effect can never be the cause of the action. The chicken cannot the egg cannot come before the chicken. The chicken has to be there first in order to lay it. It has to mate. And what Einstein left was the equal and opposite of magnetism. So back to Neil deGrasse, when he wrote his response to my paper, and he said, if you have any other questions, you're going to have to see somebody else, and he wouldn't take my calls anymore. I was like, okay, so I wrote the book based off of those responses, and I reached out to another guy, Dr. David Tong.
But that would be very, very interesting that would be his take as a public educator, that he wouldn't want to talk to you anymore.
The reason I wanted to talk to him was because of his show, The Cosmos, that he was doing after that incredible guy, Carl Sagan did. Mm-hmm. The very first episode he had was talking about Giordano Bruno. Mm-hmm. And he said that Giordano Bruno was looking for that grand unified field equation, and maybe one day somebody is going to do it. And when they do it, it's going to change the world. And I'm like, dude, I've done it. I've got it here. He attacked it with such vitriol that I was like, oh, okay, maybe I need to walk away from this. Dr. David Tong from Cambridge, a professor at Cambridge, did a video on physics of the world, and he said it's all a lie. And he explained that there was these 16 fields, that everything that they had taught was this. And they gave the best understanding and interpretation that they had of it. But it was all a lie because they didn't understand how it worked. Why? Because the Michelson-Morley experiment from 1887, where they were trying to define the ether or the earth in this etheric space, problem was they kept with Newtonian laws, so they thought the ether didn't move. They thought it was still. But there was another guy, Larmor, that did it in early 1800s, and he went off of Thomas Young, who influenced the Fresnel lens, influenced Fresnel, who came up with the Fresnel lens. But he talked about a moving ether that had opposing vortices. So I didn't learn all of this stuff until I was getting ready to have conversations with people, because I was looking, where has this work been done? But if you look at Giordano Bruno's work, it looks a lot like my stuff, but he still had straight lines, and I think he put those straight lines in there to appease the church.
Oh, wow.
So that he wouldn't get killed.
Oh, my God.
And they still killed him. They hung him upside down in 1600, the Catholic Church. 1599, hung him upside down in a stake and set him on fire, because he refused to recant that the God that they were talking about was not the true God of the universe. It was much larger than that. Their story went back 6,000 years. And there's other traditions and tribes around the world where their stories go back 200,000 years. And they made a lot more sense. So how have we limited ourselves? You take Noah having 3 sons, Shem, Japheth, and Ham, and one was black, one was Asian, and one was white. Does that make sense to you? But we subscribe to that. We
Right.
ascribe to that dogma, and everybody's entitled to whatever opinion they want to have. I don't think that opinion is right.
We're going off in so many different directions.
But
I
Neil
do
deGrasse
want to talk
Tyson-
about this.
Okay.
I do want to get to this because I would love to know what you believe happened. But the Neil deGrasse Tyson thing is so confusing to me. That he was critical of Tesla.
He was critical of Tesla. He was critical of Walter Russell, and he was critical of John Keeley.
This is not his field of study, though, right?
No, he's astrophysicist. He's an
Right.
astrophysicist. But Walter Russell talked about that the Earth. Walter Russell talked about the fact that the sun gave birth to the Earth, that it didn't coalesce from some field, and the proof of this. Do you guys know that the Earth is drifting away from the sun?
Yeah, slightly.
This is the mistake I made at the Oxford because they wouldn't allow me to bring my notes or anything. So I said the drift was 6 inches a year. It's 0.6 inches a year.
Mm-hmm.
So if you add up how long it would take the Earth to move, and all of the planets in every solar system is drifting away from their primary at this same exact rate. Like 1.5 centimeters. So this is a universal expansion that's happening with everything moving away. So them saying and the Webb telescope had proven that those galaxies couldn't have formed
Right.
13, 14 billion years ago. But if you would just add up linearly how long it would take the Earth to go from the sun to 93 million miles away, it's 9 trillion. Hold on.
Let's go.
I did all of the little calculations.
These are not little calculations.
Hold on, done.
I love that expression, but
little. Well, man, don't turn my phone off. Don't do that. Every
man.
time I get ready, well, because I know they're watching me right now, and they're mad at me.
Who's they?
The people that want that. Our entire world economy is based off of the politicians and the authorities that give the politicians their accreditation. And those authorities, those universities, are all based, their entire curriculum is based off the Platonic solids. And our world economy is based off of 1 × 1 = 1.
You think they fuck with your phone?
Oh, I'm sure of it, because now I have to turn it off for a
Do you ever
second.
drop your phone? You ever drop your phone?
I've dropped my phone a number of times, but...
You ever think that might be what's going on with your
And
phone?
then I buy another phone, and the
Same
same
thing
thing
happens.
I'm 5
you get
minutes...
burners?
I used to, but then my wife would think I was cheating.
Yeah.
So I was like, no, I don't need that. I don't need that. I made that mistake way too early, in our relationship, and it cost me 8 years of toil and pain. But I ultimately made it back, and I'm so glad that, we produce 1,500 sperm per heartbeat. Women are born with 200 to 500,000 eggs in each of their ovaries. They don't get any more. The amount of buildup, the need to reproduce for males is great. And we're 98.7% identical to simians, to chimpanzees. What do they have? They have a harem by nature.
Mm-hmm.
There's only a 1.3% differentiation between us and them, and that 1.3% is supposed to dominate over the 98. I'm just glad I'm 55 now, and sperm production has slowed down.
You could always get a phone that you don't use as anything other than contact a couple people.
Yeah, but that would work. But I'm like, if they're going to hear, they're going to hear.
Yeah, well, that is an issue. So
this is the math. This is the
Okay.
math. So it would, 5,280 feet in a mile, 12 inches in a foot. Therefore, it's 1 mile equals 63,360 inches. So the number of years that it will take for the Earth to move 1 mile is 105,600 years. So that in order for the Earth to reach where we are at 93 million miles, it would take 9,820,800,000,000 years for the Earth to get here. Likewise, Mars at 147 million miles away from the sun, it would take 15,780,480 million years for Mars to get where it was. So at a given point, Mars was here in the Goldilocks zone. And now Venus is going to inherit the Goldilocks zone next. The sun will give Mercury is under a higher pressure because they're still under the mistake thinking that there's a void in space. So they forget that Mercury is under the highest pressure possible. So it can expand. It's like hydrogen. It's like those octaves before hydrogen. So the atmosphere, the iron isn't able to release any oxygen and the oxides. But when you get to 67 million miles away from the sun, the pressure is a little less, but it's still so much higher than the pressure on Earth. It's like going deep into the very belly of the Earth. That pressure is so very high. And so now the clouds, there's a great deal of sulfur, there's a great deal of ammonia and all of those things in it. But once Earth moves to where Mars is, Venus is going to slowly move and will be right here. In maybe 5 or 6 trillion years, Venus will be right here, and humanoids will appear again and unwind the same way. And that asteroid belt that we have right now between Mars and Jupiter, that used to be a planet. And I believe that they had humanoids that developed on there, the same way that everything, that's the periodic table. They call it the periodic table because these things happen according to periodicity. They happen under regular events. You change the motion and pressure conditions, the crystallation changes. We call it a different element, but it's the same substance. Like my hand is one substance, but if I do it like this and do it like this and do it like this, it looks like a whole different thing. And they can call it a different element, but it's the same element under different motion and pressure conditions. I believe that Sirius used to be a planet when it was here, and the humanoids on there didn't recognize that we don't have a solid core. Everything expands as a sphere, and no sphere in our universe, no bubble has a solid core. We're perceiving it as a solid core, but there is not a solid core there. There's just a bubble. And at CERN, that Hadron Collider, that particle accelerator, I believe they did the same thing, and they popped their planet. And it became that asteroid belt.
Really?
Just if you add up all of the weight of the mass of those of the asteroids in the asteroid belt, it will probably equal the same mass as that of Mars.
I thought the concept of the asteroid belt was, well, first of all, there's the concept of Earth 1 and Earth 2, right? So
Yeah.
Earth 1 was a planet that was hit by a planet, and that's how our moon was established.
When have we seen that happen in nature?
Well, we haven't seen it yet, right? But these things take a long-ass time, and we don't have a whole lot of ability to see things. Our ability to see things, even with the James Webb Telescope, is fairly limited, right? Which is one of the reasons why they're able to find these galaxies that should not have been able to be formed in such a short period of time, to the extent that they have, which confuses them if they're looking at this 13.7 billion-year-old universe. These things should be much older.
Right.
In order to be this size, in order to be in the position where they're at. So you believe that the sun is the origin of these planets?
Of all the planets. Every solar
solar system
within its solar system gives birth to all of these other planets. This is what Walter Russell had talked about. This is what Neil deGrasse, and they attacked him for, because he talked about the drift, this natural drift, and that didn't make more sense. And they didn't have the idea of dark matter and dark energy then.
Right.
They didn't even come up with that. And now we understand 4% of the universe is visible,
right,
and 75% of it, 70% of it is dark energy, and 20-something% of it is dark matter. Unperceivable things, and they say that's because they needed to figure out how would they get the spin and create and have the galaxies.
Why do they hold
spiral
together?
galaxies?
Right.
Well, what my team did, Chris Seeley, who's my he's he's my Scotty. We use the same simulator that they use at Princeton. And we took linchpins, and we haven't even introduced linchpins yet, but it'll be a great introduction for it. We took linchpins, this configuration of where 6 pentagons meet, and we put them in particular order. There's a link for that right inside of the thing that James Pellegrini sent over to you, if you'll pull that up. And we rebuilt the planet Saturn without gravity. And it has the rings with no animation. It has the rings and the hexagon that's observed at the very top of it, without dark matter, without dark energy, without gravity, showing that it's an outward force pushing down that creates the planet. If you can pull that up, and he explains it out, it's like 3 minutes long.
And where does the matter come from?
He used, well, the matter, remember, that's condensation. If you were to picture, before we watch it, before we watch it, let me explain something. If you were to picture the waves at the ocean, the darker the waves, the deeper the water, you can't see a distinguishing fact between them until they crash into each other. That splatter, that little foam that comes out, it lasts for a couple seconds, and then it settles back on there, and it's just the balance between this force and this force. That's the physical universe. Those few seconds that it takes that matter, that more dense water, and the foam to recoalesce and get balanced again with the surrounding environment. That's the entire time that our universe, or all these universes, have worked together. But if you play this is at the very beginning of my book. That's why I went on that at the Emmys, and I was like, look, I've got something else to do. I've been able to rebuild Saturn without gravity, with no animation, and then they clowned it.
Of course they did. Well, this
it.
is not something that you could say in a soundbite, which is one of the reasons why I wanted to talk to you. This is not something, like your explanation of these things and your description of the very nature of reality itself is not something that should be taken lightly.
No.
It's something that, like...
Thank you for saying that.
It needs to be laid out, and it needs to be slowly examined because you've obviously spent a lot of time working on this. This thing here. So play this, Jamie.
Play it. And this is us.
What, Jamie?
Just to clarify what I'm going to play.
Yeah, and turn it up.
Hold on. There's two different videos. One's long, one's short.
No, this is going to be the short one.
Okay. My computer just reset itself too because all these files freaked it out.
Oh, yeah.
The government, man.
I don't know. I was about to tell you.
It's Neil deGrasse Tyson. He knows where your
They do
computer's
not video. It would be the first one.
This one, correct?
Gravity is an effect.
Okay.
It's an effect of electricity. So turn it up because Chris does a full narration of it.
It's still, hold on, my computer's still
And he was talking to my wife and explaining to her what he had worked on. And this is 6 years ago, I think, or maybe 5 years ago. But as soon as it allows you to...
let's see.
The center.
Yeah, rewind it just a little bit.
Object.
Yep.
Okay, here we go.
It's just 3 minutes
I have
long.
two groups of vortexes, which are just like tornadoes, spinning tornadoes that are pointing towards the center. As I highlight this object here, you'll see it, that yellow line, right? So there's a bunch of those in there. There's actually 16 of them, and I'll highlight them all.
Oh, hold on. It's not doing anything. See, it's
about to happen.
No, nothing's happening. My computer just froze again, is what I'm trying to say. Something freaked out my computer. I might have to just try to...
You want to reboot?
I mean, I think it already did, but I'll try again. Hold on. May have to pause.
Yeah. Okay, no worries.
Yeah, I can't.
Yeah, that's what it should be doing. But it's going to basically, you'll see.
Oh, wait. That's weird. I have...
What's the matter?
What I can see on that screen is not what I can see on my computer screen. I can't even see that.
It's the fucking government, man.
You think it's not?
I think it is sometimes. I assume they listen to everything I say.
They do.
I'm sure.
They do. You
It's
took
a lot of boring shit.
You took a bold stand, though, years ago when the governments were trying to poison their citizens. You took a very bold stand that nobody else took. That's what I was like, wow, I appreciate you, because I lost 3-4 jobs because I refused to take it. I refused.
I bet you feel better about it now.
Well,
especially when you know all these people that have health problems because of it.
Cancers have increased 300%.
All-cause mortality up 40% in some age groups.
Pulmonary embolisms almost up like 500%.
Yeah, wonder what caused
Thrombosis.
that.
Well,
Crazy.
the spike proteins that's being built and collected within the system. We can
Yeah.
go into. I can walk you through what the spike protein did to the BRCA1 gene. That's that gene inside of our DNA that tells us that there's damage that's happening, almost like the crews that go along the highway and they immediately put up cones every time there's a problem. Well, the spike protein, which is no protein has ever been able to enter into the nucleus of a cell. Not only does it go to the ribosome to say, hey, you know what? I don't want you to produce whatever protein, like if it was a skin cell, you're not going to produce keratin anymore. You're just going to produce these spike proteins. That spike protein went into the DNA and it tells the BRCA1 gene, turn off. And that's the gene that says, hey, there's a mutation here. Let's scrap that thing. And so now the cancers are building up. The spike proteins weren't shedding from the body. They collected in the ovaries. They collected in the lymph nodes. They collected in the bone marrow. So now we have all of these diseases that's showing themselves because the body is overwhelmed trying to deal with the spike protein that's attaching itself to the ACE2 and the endothelial cells in our vascular system for everybody out
And the
there.
more boosters you get,
Boom,
the
you're
worse
turning
your
your
outcomes are
system
gonna be.
off. You're turning it
Yeah.
off. Your body cannot defend itself, and it's just collecting. It's just collecting.
but it also showed me the bizarre state of human psychology that people, if you're presented with what could be a potential solution, you want to believe in it so bad that you're willing to defend these companies that have been the most deceptive companies, proven deceptive, not just deceptive, but deceptive in the way that they are allowed to distribute information. They're allowed to not be transparent about their studies. They could have multiple studies that show a negative cause or a negative effect, and they don't have to release those studies
Why?
because they're bought and sold.
But I think it's an agenda to it.
You think so?
I think it's an agenda attached to it because they restricted any natural thing like ivermectin. Iver means like it caused ivermectin. Mectin, for the Latin of it, it was worms and it was anti-worms. And what the ivermectin does, it causes the worms to have paralysis, or parasites to have paralysis, because it stops their information from passing. And there's these things called the nodes of Ranvier between each neuron. There's an axon and there's the axon, and oh my God, I just forgot the leg that comes off of dendrites. Those dendrites and the axons have these things called nodes of Ranvier, where they're not allowed to touch each other, and it transfers potassium and chlorine back and forth to each other. Potassium, chlorine, chloride, and hydrogen back and forth. Well, in the worm, the ivermectin stops that to where the worms become paralyzed. So it was an immediate defense against the pathogen, but they immediately shut that down and wouldn't allow
also,
anybody to use it.
They showed that it stops viral replication
Completely.
in vitro. Yeah, they know that they know that there's a mechanism involved, and they try to pretend. And then they also try to pretend it's dangerous, which is insane. And they even got Rolling Stone magazine on board with it, where they printed an article where they were showing these people that were waiting in line for gunshot victims because so many people were overdosing on horse dewormer.
Yeah, well, that was propaganda.
It was a full-on lie. Not only that, they were so stupid and clumsy about it that the image that they used, this is Oklahoma. The image that they used was like in the summer in Oklahoma, and yet everybody's dressed in winter coats. It was retarded. The whole thing was so stupid, but so obviously coordinated. It was confusing to me how many people were willing to go along with it and how many people were angry at people who didn't go along with it regardless of what they were saying. even if what they were saying was reasonable, even if what they're saying, especially if you're talking about like Jay Bhattacharya and these people that were professors at esteemed universities, and they were being silenced, and there was a coordinated effort to remove their posts from Twitter. This is wild shit.
Yeah.
Unprecedented wild shit. And the population was just going along with it. For me, what was fascinating was psychologically. Like, do you guys not know about deception? Do you not know about profit motive? Do you not know about the history of pharmaceutical drug companies in this country and what they've been able to get away with how many people they've paid?
The Tuskegee experiment.
Oh, my God.
I couldn't understand how black people or people of color were running and trusting the government after what happened to them with the Tuskegee experiment. And for people that don't know what the Tuskegee experiment was, in the early 1920s, a group of government officials came down, doctors, and they went through the black community and they said, there's a sickness in all of you guys and we're going to cure it free of charge. And they injected the black population with syphilis and left it untreated for 60 years and just watched how it ravaged the body. For 60 years, it wasn't stopped until like 1970s, late 70s, that they stopped the experiment. And I don't even know if they've paid reparations. So the government has been using all of these chemical warfare or biological warfare against its own citizens for a long time.
Constantly. There's so many instances of it.
So that's why I didn't do it.
There's so many instances of it, documented instances of it. And that's the Tuskegee experience, one of the most horrific. And the fact that it went on until the 70s is just fucking terrifying. But this is just the nature of having that much secrecy and control and profit motive and being able to enforce power on people. And it's a thing that human beings have always done. Whenever human beings have gotten into a position where they're ruling over others, they are callous and evil, almost always, almost universally. There's not one instance of this amazing, benign, beautiful leader that transformed their society into this incredible utopia. It doesn't exist in history.
No. Animals and insects, not one of them are responsible for the eradication of any species on this planet.
Right.
Not one single creature from history, but mankind is responsible for the extinction of millions.
Even when animals are responsible for the extinction, it's because human beings introduced those animals into places where they didn't belong, like cats in Australia.
All the birds.
Yeah, they killed everything.
So this is man's interference, and it's based upon their lack of understanding. Because they don't know how the universe truly works, because their math has been off for so long, because their fundamentals are wrong, now everything has this expiration and there's a loss to everything when the universe is perfectly balanced, when you utilize it properly. And that's why I wanted to introduce the wave conjugations and the mirror shapes and all of these things. Defining the electric field, defining the magnetic field, and the constitution between them being the linchpin. Because the linchpin, as you'll see in a second, it has that same center as that tetrine space. The magnetic field, the feminine side, all of this is circular. That's the full expansion. This is the common factor or the constitution between the micro and the macro. That's what the linchpin was, and that's what we're about to see in the video. Was it able to come up, Jamie?
All right, here we go.
And this is rebuilding the planet Saturn. Go ahead.
The sound was coming through your speaker? Is that what it was? Time for a new laptop?
No, I don't know what's going on.
You know what's going on.
Government,
They do not want you. We're about to kill gravity. We're about to kill their god, gravity, and they don't want that.
Towards the
Here we go.
center.
Here we go. From the beginning.
I have two groups of vortexes, which are just like tornadoes, spinning tornadoes that are pointing towards the center. As I highlight this object here, you'll see it, that yellow line. right? So there's a bunch of those in there. There's actually 16 of them, and I'll highlight them all. There. And render that just so you can kind of see a little bit better. So they're all pointed towards the center, but they're arranged in what we call the linchpin configuration. I'm going to pretend like you never heard of that before. So there's one on the top, and then 3 in groups of 3 around that are spaced at 120 degrees apart, and the tilt of these ones on the bottom here is 109.5 degrees in relationship to the top ones that are creating this flat space on the top and the bottom. And they're spaced at 120 degrees radially. And then inside the model is 3 groups.
Jamie, there's 2 sounds playing simultaneously.
No, it's got sound in the background.
Oh, while he's
that's
doing
my
it?
wife talking. We're in the kitchen, and he's just explaining this over Skype.
Recorded from a Skype
This is
call.
over
Okay.
Skype.
I was confused. Go ahead.
Up to 1,000 pounds, from 2.2 pounds to 1,000 pounds. And there's no gravity whatsoever in this model. There's no center attractor. So it's just vortexes and two magnetic fields, a north and a south polarity, and 1 harmonic resonance, which is emanating a vibration in the field in this region here where these vortexes are pointed. So it kind of just oscillates to give it a little bit of randomness in motion so that the particles will kind of interact and bounce around like smoke or water, waves and water. And then when I hit play, it does it all by itself using physics simulations. So there's no animations at all in this model. And when I play it, this is what pops out.
Holy fuck.
Wow.
And then when I look down at the top, it makes the actual hexagon that NASA has observed on the top of Saturn without any gravity. And you'll see that you get a surface of the sphere on the inside with the heavier particles. So the colors
So are you basically saying, is this saying that you guys can recreate planets?
yes, this is a particle simulation of the physics involved in making of the planet Saturn.
Wow.
Like all the So the heavier particles are creating the red and the green.
Can I pause this for a second?
Yeah.
So is he saying that just by doing these calculations, it created the exact form of Saturn, including the rings?
Just the exact form of it.
Just with the
So you
calculations.
change the angles of incidence that these linchpins, because remember, each one of these are opposing vortices. So there's 12 vortices to this that are opposing. So once the angles of incidence change, you change the motion and pressure conditions, you can now change the condition or the crystallization. So I was saying with the periodic table, now because we have the angles of incidence, material engineering can now separate the space between carbon and nitrogen or carbon and boron and have the same elements of titanium, vanadium, chromium, magnesium, and iron, or nickel, cobalt, nickel, copper, zinc, gallium, or germanium in those higher octaves. We can do that between silicon and phosphorus or silicon and aluminum. So the transparent aluminum now becomes possible because we can now control the pressure and change the pressure and motion conditions where we couldn't do that before because they were going by Cartesian space at 90 degrees and 45 degrees straight lines, the Euclidean space that they've made up, this orthogonal or church-like space that they've generated because they wanted to promote that cross. That was the basis of all of that. Now we open ourselves up. This is what happens when 4 bubbles meet. This is the negative space from when 4 bubbles are meeting. That's hydrogen. That's why when I went to Uganda, I was like, look, we have an entirely new system of hydrogen that I've got a patent where we're able to, you won't need projectiles in the guns anymore. If you pull up my patent for projectile
Before we do that, though, should we finish this?
Oh yeah, finish it.
Let's finish this video, and then Jamie,
And it's
could
only
you
like a minute
also
longer.
get? I want to see a photo of that hexagon on the top of the Saturn. So let's play this.
It's just another minute, I think.
I feel like we could do an 80-hour podcast.
Dude, we haven't even got. We're just introducing linchpins.
I know.
Which is another super symmetrical system.
I'm barely hanging on.
I think the computer.
No, you're not.
No.
Turn it up.
No, I'm having a computer freak out again.
Oh no.
Yeah, it's every time I'm shrinking in this video, it's just like it doesn't like to do this.
Huh.
I don't know what's going on.
Is it the codec?
I have no control over the computer. Alt tab does nothing. Escape does nothing.
Yo.
Spacebar does nothing.
Maybe you dropped your computer.
Maybe you drop your computer, Jamie.
I'm gonna try to reset again.
But Jamie, you need a burner computer.
Yeah, they don't want their God killed. Gravity has been the thing they've been holding on to from the beginning, and it's just an effect of electricity. It's the draft left over by electricity.
Is it working now, Jamie?
It's just did like another like false reset. So let me get my stuff back together here.
But we've seen that portion of it. So what I'm saying,
We're about here.
Yeah, right there.
yeah.
Yeah.
All right, we'll try. Oh shit. Hold on. Too many things.
This is kind of funny. If you haven't.
Has this ever happened to y'all
No.
before?
No.
Fascinating.
Yeah, if you want to be paranoid.
I mean, I'm not paranoid.
I am.
I'm a bit of a skeptic. I'm a realist. If if A is equal to B and B is equal to C, then A is equal to C. If this has never happened before and it's always happening to me, maybe I'm just bad luck. Am I bad luck?
No, here we go. Okay.
without any gravity. And you'll see that you get a surface of the sphere on the inside with the heavier particles. So the colors
So
of
are you basically saying, is this saying that you guys can recreate planets?
yes, this is a particle simulation of the physics involved in making
Yeah,
up the
just froze
planet
again.
Saturn.
Oh.
Like all the yeah. So the heavier particles are creating the red and the green here where the hexagon is, and those are the heavier ones creating the shell of the planet, and then the outside are lighter particles that are a fluid that's creating the counter rotation of the atmosphere of Saturn, like we observe scientifically. And the red ones in the middle here are where the magnetic field is strongly polarized at the north and south poles, which gives you aurora borealis.
I have a question. Now, does this mean that you would be able to control what kind of atmosphere the planet has as well? Like you can change that? Because you can create it, that means you can change it.
We now have a system by which you can, it's the arrangement of linchpins and the axis upon which they are spinning in relation to each other. And, or vibrating. By doing that, we can create the condition, any condition that we want.
So you can have human life here, is what you're saying.
We can recreate life.
If you're able to change and alter these external fields and understand, like at least this would give us a method of studying it in such a way that we now understand that it's external pressures being applied from the outside in, not the standard model where you have internal fission reaction and nuclear in a planet with magnetic fields from iron cores, etc., going outward. Right? That's all kind of ego based at the center. This is pretty solid evidence that everything we're observing is from the outside coming in. So the entire universe is actually creating these planets from the outside in, from space itself, the pressures.
Turning rays.
You can stop it. Now, so
Go to that image.
like if you picture dropping a pebble into a pond or a pool, everything expands in these longitudinal waves,
Right.
perfect spheres, unless there's something else in there. But when it hits the edge, it all starts bouncing its way back. And when these returning waves meet expanding waves, that's when we get our first geometry. So this is the proof that the universe is not infinite, but finite. because you could not have shape without the returning waves, and the waves would not return unless it was bouncing off of the edge of something.
Look how strange that is.
Bingo.
Look how strange that hexagon on the top of of Saturn is.
Mm-hmm.
Or yeah, that's Saturn, right?
Yep, and then
Yeah.
we don't even, and
That is so crazy.
he explains exactly how he built it, all the angles of incidence, all the pressure systems that he used. All of that is so it can be a repeated experiment. But they've ignored this. This is in the beginning of my book. You go to my book, that's the first page on there. Before you even open it up, I've got this, and we rebuilt the Milky Way galaxy the same way, and it predicts the star arrangement better than NASA does. And this is without dark matter. This is without dark energy. This is without the standard model. So
is dark matter or dark energy, are they primarily theoretical?
That's all theoretical. They've never witnessed it, and we couldn't prove that Michelson-Morley experiment that they did in 1887, which said that there was no effect because they tried to move a table around and change the angle of incidence for light to see if the light changed when you move the table. The experiment is like this. The mental experiment is like this. If you're going to experiment, you have an A structure, and you have an idea of how A behaves, and you have a thought that if you put A in a particular situation, it's going to turn into B. So let's picture it hypothetically like you have a bar that's maybe 6 inches long of iron, and you say, okay, well, I think if it goes into the freezer that it's going to get shorter. So you're supposed to have 2 exact bars 6 inches out and leave one outside of the freezer, and put one in the freezer, and then you compare them after you see it. So A over X is equal to R times B over X. R is the result or the change between them. B is the change that occurs. R is what fraction or the X that you use in order to get back to A or to convert it to B. What they did with the Michelson-Morley experiment, because they could not get out of the ether. They couldn't step outside of the ether because it's everything around us. So they couldn't tell a difference, whether they saw no result, no change. So they assumed there was a void, that there was no ether there. And that's when particle physics took off. Lorentz, a great physicist that everybody loved, entered a paper in 1904 where he was continually explaining the ether the same way that Maxwell, all of his theories came off of there being an ether, but he was still limited by Newtonian laws and the Coulomb force of opposites attracting. When it's the positive, it's the things that are alike that attract. But he believed that the ether was still and space was flat. And so space-time, or Einstein relativity, came as a result of them taking the ether away. And for 100 years, we've walked down this particle physics world that's all theoretical. And here I've patented these wave conjugations that is the ether, is the contraction of the ether and the expansion of it. And on top of that, the proof of it was I've been able to build new industries from it. If you go to, I want to introduce the linchpin, if I can. With all of the talk.
Before we do that, can you tell me how a planet is formed under this theory? So you have a sun, and how does the sun give birth to these planets?
The same way we defecate and have gas, like Jupiter's, that red spot on Jupiter, that's spinning on it, that's going to become a moon. It may take a billion or 2 billion years. That will ultimately become a moon off of Jupiter. Where is it? Right at the equator. Where do we discharge at? Right at our equator. And then it will rotate its way around and slowly be pushed out by the solar wind by Jupiter's
So like coronal
magnetic
mass ejections.
Coronal mass ejections.
So some kind of ejection of matter leaves the sun, and over billions and billions of years, enough of it collects, and there's enough of a force
To where ultimately that coalescing idea that they have, That's where it happens. It's not from materials that's just been left over from the Big Bang, like Rupert Sheldrake says, the physicists of today ask for, you give us one miracle and, show us how everything came from nothing and we'll explain everything else. And they can't explain everything else. They can't explain the morphic resonance that's happening between things. Like right now, because I've discovered these wave conjugations, every person on the planet that's been thinking about it will now have ideas concerning, but not just us, but all humanoids throughout the entire universe will now get that same resonance and be able to apply it like the experiments with the rats.
Right.
You teach a rat something here in London, and then in New York you find the rats are doing the same thing.
Right.
Spontaneously, because of the morphic resonance, because we are all connected on this ether, and that waveform that's the consciousness. We are all just one great being.
Yeah.
That's what they forget. We're not separate. The universe is probably one cell inside of some super organism.
Right.
And we're just little who, little who's like Horton hears a who and trying to make sense of it. And it's a beautiful thing that we're making sense of it. But everything is just one great being. We're all God. That's what Jesus was talking about. That's what Buddha was talking about. It's recognizing the divinity in you. What I did as a child, I said, I'm going to, instead of waiting for the Messiah to show up, what if everybody picked up their torture stake and behaved and did the things that they had expected the Messiah to do? What if everybody just for one day walked around and behaved as if they were God himself and did the things that they would expect the Creator? And we know God can't just be a male, because no man can produce a child without a female. Everything in the universe, as above, so below, like Billy Carson always talks about. You can't, everything has an equal and opposite. It has to mate. Mating is a big part of what we do. The boron mates with nitrogen, and that's how the carbon happens. Everything inside of us, all our cells, they're mating. There's a relationship going on in it. Everything's alive. There is no death, but that the Bible talked about a mechanistic world. God took dirt and blew into it the breath of life, and it came to life. But if you look at the Brownian effect, what is breathing? Going from positive to negative. And they see all these, even the plastic that makes these things up are still going from, it's still carbon, polarizing from positive to negative. Breathing in, breathing out. It's just under a different state of matter, but there is no death. There's no death. Everything's eternal. And once we get rid of the idea, okay, you're going to die and disappear, then they don't have any grasp over you anymore. And to be free, the truth will set you free. That's why I was like, okay, well, if this truth caused me this lifetime, then wonderful, I've accomplished what I needed to do. Because I think in the previous lifetime, I was supposed to do these things and I didn't. And that's why it's been so hard for me. And that's why I've pushed so hard to get these things out, because
So you felt like that, like from the womb?
From the womb, I had to get this done.
So you felt like you had these things that you didn't get out in a previous lifetime, and now you feel like an unstoppable urge.
I have to at all costs.
So can I go, I would love to talk more about this, but I don't want to lose this thought. So if I want to go back to the formation of planets. So under this theory, these stars eject matter, and over time, this matter will achieve a certain amount of distance from the sun.
Short distance. Look at Mercury. Mercury isn't that far from it.
Right. It kind of makes sense. And then over time, it'll eventually get further and further out. The sun will continue to make more and more planets over an imperceptible amount of time. We won't be able to measure it. In our world, we'll see it. It appears static. just like plants appear static to
Yes.
us. But if you ever watch a one of those
The
motion
secret
capture,
life of plants.
yeah, plants are moving and touching each other, and they're just doing it at a pace that our brain can't handle.
A different temporal dimension.
Yes. So the sun is creating planets, but it's doing so at a pace that our mind can't really wrap around. So we want to think there's just matter and that it's flying through space and
It's inanimate.
collects via gravity, and the more mass, the more gravity.
It's supposed to, but take a balloon. Another
Mm-hmm.
thing that kills gravity. Gravity is supposed to be the greater the mass is the greater the attractor. You take a balloon, you rub it on your leg, you put it over the ground. Watch the dust particles jump off the ground, off this big mass called the Earth, and jump onto that balloon. Because why? Electricity is 137 times stronger than the pull of gravity or the effects of the so-called gravity. It's the electric force that's the attractive force. It's the electric force that tightens everything together as the masculine, and then the dividing force is the radiative force, the magnetic field. It ablates and pushes everything out, and then they collect together again. But where these things meet, at the proper angles of incidence, like the Birkeland currents talked about, those plasma currents talked about, those angles of incidence is at 120 degrees when it converts it back into electricity, and it will keep collecting and coming and making life. The planet isn't a dead thing. It didn't just happen to come together. That's just the process by which it was given life. It's alive, and it's screaming. It thought we were going to be beneficial to it, and now it's trying to kill us. It needs to scratch itself and get rid of us because we are too dangerous, because we are using antiquated fundamentals. And like people say, well, what business do you have coming in here talking about science and all that? You're an actor. You want to know what my first patent was? The entire AR, VR world was built off of my first patent that was abandoned because I paid $260,000 for the worldwide patent. But then my agents my lawyers kept sending me these maintenance fees and annuities. And I'm like, these folks are just trying to shake me down. I'm not going to pay this. Well, a year later, if you would pull up my World of Windows patent, I think it's one of the first patents up there, I want you to see where your AR, VR world came from. And you look at the list of companies that has cited, and didn't just cite it, they built their entire AR, VR world off of my World of Windows patent. Can you pull that up, Jamie? Of the computer. Yeah, it's the very, not that one, not that one, not that one. Yeah, that's the propulsion patent. No. That's all you have, huh? Really?
I'll double check.
If you can go to Terry's linchpin, I'll show you on here. This is what this is what we put together for.
Is that online?
This is online.
Text me that link and I'll just send it to him.
Yeah,
You got it?
you got it.
Okay.
So merging virtual reality. It says merging virtual reality with reality. Go down. Patents and files, the very first one. Tap on that. So you go look over to, you'll see my name, inventor, Terrence Deshaun Howard. Worldwide application, and let's just read the abstract just so they'll...
System and method for merging virtual reality and reality. Scroll it so I can see it. To provide an enhanced sensory experience. A system and method of merging virtual reality sensory detail from a remote site into a room environment at a local site. The system preferably includes at least one image server, a plurality of image collection devices, a display system comprising display devices, a control unit, digital processor, and a viewer position detector. The control unit preferably receives the viewer position information and transmits instructions to the digital processor. The digital processor preferably processes source data representing an aggregated flow aggregated field of view from the image capturing devices in accordance with the instructions received from the control unit and outputs the refined data representing a desired display view to be displayed on one or more display devices wherein the viewer position detector dynamically determines the position of the viewer in the room environment and changes the desired display view corresponding to position changes of the viewer.
Now you see
This is all you?
Yeah, look at the inventor. Go up a little bit
see
and
it.
slide over. It says
Yeah.
Terrence Deshaun Howard.
Yeah.
Worldwide patent 2010. It was abandoned. Now go to cited by. You see that 131 cited by? Tap on there. It's right under where it says abandoned. Yep, patent
Cited
citation.
by 31.
Cited by 31. It's to the right. Yep, right there. Tap on there and look at all the companies. And if you look at the patent, these companies have all earned, they have multi-billion-dollar companies they've built off of my patent. Just roll through.
Sony, Microsoft, Amazon.
Hewlett Packard.
Yeah.
Keep going. IBM,
crazy.
and it's still making money. This patent has earned over $7 trillion.
And you didn't get a piece.
And I haven't gotten a penny of it. When they did all of the Black Lives Matter, like Raytheon Company, and IBM, if you
Crazy.
and it still has another 9 years, another 8 years in which I would be making money off it. But what they didn't know is they didn't understand is how it was really supposed to work. So they've just been taking this gun and been using it as a bat. And if they wanted to know, I could show them how it really, really works. But this is proof that my stuff
Is legit.
is legit.
So let me ask you this before we stray away from this too much. The concept of gravity. So if it's all electricity that's causing these forces and it's all outside in, when the Saturn V rocket is escaping Earth's atmosphere, what is it fighting against?
What that's fighting against is the rotation. Remember, there's a centripetal spin that's taking place with the Earth.
Right.
And there's an electrical field that's generated from that. That's that centripetal spin that holds things inside. That's what it's fighting against. That's that electric field.
And we're calling it gravity.
We're calling it gravity, but gravity is just the effect of the electric field, and the electric field is balanced by the radiative field.
And the more mass something has, the more it gets pulled.
The greater electric potential it has. You know,
So the more
the tighter
dense
the
something
waves
is, the
are.
heavier it is.
the
more
waves
it's-
are tighter.
Yes.
The electricity can now, it doesn't have to jump over anything. And as I showed you with some of the pieces, as long as they're close together, then you don't have the magnetic field that forms, that discharge, because they're able to stay northeasterly in their direction. They're not forced to go southwesternly and spin out. Either you're spinning to the right or spinning to the left. That's the only two directions in the universe. Spinning to the right is northeastern, that's electric. If it's spinning to the left, it's magnetic, and it's expanding out. It contracts in fifths and expands in sixes. And so now what I would love to do is invite Neil deGrasse and David Tong, or any astrophysicist, any chemist, any anyone in any field of science to sit down with me and examine these patents, examine the supersymmetrical systems that I've developed. But I want to show you linchpin now. Here I'm an Oscar-nominated actor that is known all around the world, face recognition, vocal recognition, all around the world. I've invented a new form of flight, tangential flight, the ability to fly around your own center of mass, something they've never been able to do. And you don't hear anything about it. And it's unlimited bonding. If you can go to what Jonathan Davis sent over, he's one of the other programmers that work with us.
Explain what it does. Explain, when you said flight, what do you mean?
Tangential flight.
What do you mean by that?
It means right now, fixed-wing aircraft, you can go in 4 degrees of direction. They go up, down, some can go forwards and backward, backwards and right to left. But this is able to spin around its own center of mass. Completely spin around its own center of mass, something people are able to do it by falling, but this is a sustained system that's able to go around. I sent that other video to you. But their ability, because this is the geometry of hydrogen, any bond that hydrogen can make, linchpin can make. And what they're basically doing is building the periodic table in front of you. If you would play 4 of them coming together, it's 4 like 30-second videos. I'll explain it out. But you'll see how these things align themselves. Well, this is the swarm. And they're all following this queen as a colony. And they'll do everything that she's doing. Go to the very first video. There's 4 in a row on it. Oh, that's how it came over to you. Well, let's see which one this is. This is 4 of them that's going to come together to pick up a barrel.
And what's powering them?
Right now, we're going to use hydrogen fuel cells. But I have another system, that I was going to talk about in a second. But it's an unlimited source of power. But,
so hydrogen fuel cells,
or you can use lithium batteries.
And
at
they're
present.
how are they moving? Like, what are those? Is that like are those like propellers?
Yeah, those are props. But
okay.
But that right there, what we have right there is it's a pitch. Collective pitch. So instead of the props having to turn themselves around, instead of all the props having to turn themselves around to stop and turn in the opposite direction,
like a helicopter,
they just switch the direction. They just so it's a collective pitch, and it changes. And so now instead of going up, you're going down. But now 5 of them will come together and watch what the 5 does with. So this is the end of cranes.
Oh.
This is and how many is necessary. And they can, since this is the fractal, they can be as small as a nanoparticle, or they can be as large as the universe, because the entire universe comes down to this. So I was trying to reach out to Elon Musk. I was trying to reach out to Jeff Bezos. Because my main goal was I was building these to clean up the upper atmosphere, all of that debris that's up there, and ultimately to mine the asteroid belt. Because you can't go out there. They keep talking about going out there. That's like you try and go that far away. That's like taking a starfish from the bottom of the ocean and bringing it up to where we are. Everything expands. The nitrogen expands too much. That animal dies. You take us outside where Mars is, nitrogen has expanded so much more. The hydrogen has expanded so much more that you will never be able to, you won't even have a spaceship or a suit on that's strong enough to keep your body together, and you will never be able to come back to 93 million miles away from the sun, because everything will have expanded, and you will expand to the point of vacuity and explode out. So trying to send a man out to Mars is like trying to send a man to live on Venus. The pressure is too tight near Venus. We will get crushed in a second. It's like being pushed to the bottom of the ocean immediately. You will get crushed immediately. The pressure conditions change as we move from the sun. But science have neglected that because they've said it's a void there. And they don't account for that higher pressure condition, but they found that radioactive decay is quicker closer to the sun, near Venus. Why? Because the pressure condition, that electric field and those magnetic fields are pushing on each other, causing it to turn back into an electric force in comparison to further away. When the Earth is closer to the sun, they found that radioactive decay is quicker than when it's further away from the sun. Is that by accident? Or is it just because of the change of pressure conditions? So us talking about going out, when my wife said on the thing, are we going to be able to put people on Saturn? No, it's too nebulous. It's expanded out too far. Our pressure, we would have to have a suit so strong and powerful in order for us to do that. But linchpin is able to make it out there, because we have another propulsion system that we've put together where I'm able to take water and put it into a small change. And this patent has been granted. It's the propulsion projectile. And we patented it as a gun because I didn't want anybody else to be able to use it like a gun. But it's basically lightning in a bottle. We take water and we put it inside of a small chamber based on the wave conjugations that I have and the angles of incidence. And we run an electric charge through a small amount of water. The water is not able to expand into gas like it wants to because it's locked into the pressure condition. So immediately it converts into plasma. And it converts the gas dimension into a power dimension. So it's lightning out of the barrel just from water. And there's no end like with...
So it's a real lightning gun, like
yes,
from Quake.
Yes. So, and the patent's been granted. Typically, you're limited to how much charge you can put inside of a cartridge. And, you know, you have to get more and more charge or explosive in there to get something out. But with electricity, you can send 1,000 volts or 1,000,000 volts through the same aperture. And that water is incompressible. And so it's just going to react, and immediately it converts into a plasma. And so we can project anything into space. All of that has been accomplished, and it's ignored.
So it can act as a propulsion system for rockets as well?
Rockets, anything, and in space. And that's the whole point for it to, because there's just nothing but moisture and that collective and ice in there. So you can now, the linchpins can go all the way past Mars, attach themselves to whatever asteroid, mine that asteroid, bring it back, and have in one of the Lagrange areas. So for the audience out there, Lagrange areas are those areas where multiple magnetic fields meet and there's no weight to something. Another death blow to gravity was the fact that it's not a constant. It could not be a constant because things weigh heavier on the poles of the Earth than it does on the surface of the poles than it does at the equator. They're heavier at the poles than they are at the equator. And the further away from the Earth you go, the less it goes. So there's no consistency about gravity. It is not a constant. It is a coefficient, and it's more so just an effect. And it's the same thing with the Planck scale. You look at the Planck scale or the Planck length or the Planck weight. All of those things are based upon gravity, and they're supposed to occur at 10 to the 15th, 10 to the minus 15th, the Planck scale. But at 10 to the minus 35 is where the proton and all of that behaves. They have gravity inside of there as if it's affecting it, but they've already said that at a small molecular level, you know, at the nuclear level, gravity has no effect. So how is that part of a Planck scale? You know, there's a guy, Fleming, that talks a lot about this, but you take that, you look at the speed of light. Is that a constant? You know, in 1928, they saw that there was different fluctuations between 1928 and 1948 between the speed of light. And then out of nowhere, and Rupert Sheldrake talks about this, out of nowhere, they began to be a constant again, where there were fluctuations before. And he asked one of the professors about it, and he said, it's a thing that we call intellectual phase locking, where when they get different measurements for the speed of light, all of the scientists around the world will average it out to one thing instead of showing the fluctuations in it.
Oh, wow.
It's called intellectual phase locking. It's not
But is that
called
also
fudging.
because of the crude methods of measurement that they have available?
No, they've been able to measure light, the speed of light, since Galileo was measuring Io going around Jupiter. And that's how they came up with the speed of light, was how he watched Io going around Jupiter and saw that there was a difference in how the light behaved. And they've been able to get very close measurements to what they thought was the speed of light. But it's never been a constant because it changes depending upon the medium it's going through. So there's no constant there, but they have that as part of the Planck scale. But the linchpin, the wave conjugations, the tetryon, it's the end of Planck. It's the end of Schrodinger's equation. It's the end of Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. And I'm ready to have the debate at any university anytime they want to. But they have no comeback for it because I have 4 supersymmetrical systems, and that's the thing about geometry. Geometry is its own proof. Supersymmetry is its own proof, whereas equations, anybody can have an equation. And only certain people can try and understand it, and it can be fudged with renormalization, where anytime they have an infinity, they renormalize it. That's why Dyson left the whole group back in the 1940s when they were talking about quantum electrodynamics. And Feynman said it himself, with this renormalization, is that real physics? Is this real math? All of them recognize that this is fudging because they had went the wrong direction by taking the ether out of the equation. And now I have proof of the ether and how it behaves.
Wow. I wish I could really truly understand exactly what you're saying, because I'm kind of getting it and you're doing a great job explaining it. But if you're right, that really changes everything.
Everything.
And it accounts for why physics kind of hits a stalling point.
They've been going in the wrong direction. 96% of physics is unknown matter that they've had to make up to account for it, and we were able to build Saturn without that. We were able to show the extent...
The fact that it also has a hexagon is very bizarre.
The age of the universe. You can wind up all of the satellites, all of the planets in every solar system, and can wind up and get back to the real age of our universe. Would be gazillions of years based upon this drift. If you walk away from that Big Bang or special relativity, because that was the cause of all that. Black holes came from the thought of gravity gone crazy. When gravity goes crazy, light won't even be able to escape from it because light was thought as moving as a particular constant. We've just killed that.
What do you think a black hole is?
It doesn't exist. There aren't black holes. There's no spot where where energy goes in and never comes back out. There's no place in the universe where the information paradox occurs, where there isn't a balance. Something gets contracted and never comes out. That's not how the universe behaves. It comes in and it goes out. When Newton said that gravity pulls down, if he had with that apple, yes, the apple was attracted to like conditions on the earth. It was attracted to like conditions. If he had spent another week or 2 weeks watching that apple, he would have watched the gases go right back up to where they were equalized. Everything, if it comes this way, it has to go this way. You breathe in, you breathe out. It's filling in or pouring out.
So what do you think they're detecting when they're detecting black holes?
With that shift that they're talking about, that's the tornado. Remember, there's a vortice. There's all these huge vortices. Everything is spinning around a vortice. So a collection of larger vortices is going to have the same thing that's happening at the center of the galaxy is happening in the center of a hurricane. It's happening in your toilet stool.
Which is why the galaxy is a circular disk in the first place.
Everything, all motion is expressed in waves. All waves are expressed in curves. It always makes spirals.
So because of the concept of gravity and because of the concept of this event horizon, this super point of gravity, this infinite point that light can't even escape, that this exists because of the theory
their math,
of gravity.
And their math. Remember, they have a thing called zero. They go from 1 to 0 to -1. There is no zero to even think zero.
So do you think that zero is a concept that came along with currency?
It should be attached to currency in that regard, because in physics, it's either nothing remains still. There's nothing still in the universe. There's nothing that doesn't have motion because everything is connected. So if one thing is still, everything that's connected to it has to be still. There can never be one thing still. So as electricity tries to get to its balanced state. Right when it gets there, magnetism takes over and it pushes over. So there's this pendulum. And as soon as it gets to this state, it bounces off that other noble gas and it makes its way all the way back over here and it's about to have equanimity. And then it gets pulled back into the other direction. And that's the breathing in and breathing out and the pendulum effect that we've all observed in natural phenomena in the universe.
And that's a part of everything.
Everything behaves that way. Every one of our cells. Comes down to our cells are made up of water, mostly water, 80%, 90% water somewhere. Water is hydrogen. Hydrogen has 12 vortices that's behaving with it, 12 opposing vortices.
So what, in your model, what happens to these suns when they supernova?
Everything gets old and die.
Everything gets old and die. And does everything recompress?
Has to. And you breathe out, what happens to that air? Another plant breathes that air in.
So would this be the universe itself? Would it be galaxies? Would it be...
Everything behaves the same way.
So as the sun expands and projects and ejects particles, they expand, they go further and further from the sun, and at a certain point, they come back.
Well, at a certain point, what do they hit? There's other expanding stars and
So like waves colliding.
yes,
And
from
retreating.
the other star systems, they have an expanding. What is the thing? The solar wind. They have expanding solar winds.
Mm-hmm.
So when they meet. Our star meets the solar wind from another star at that end of that spot. Now there's two pressure conditions. So you have another Lagrange spot that's happening there. That's when those waves start coming back, but they get hit. And if they hit at 120 degrees, because that's how the universe is arranged, now these things become electric. So they, instead of coming from the planar side and expanding out at the equator, they now come back up from the northern and southern parts.
So does this account for stellar nurseries?
Yes. All of these things are just pressure conditions hitting each other. And they're causing that. That's where the Birkeland currents are running through, those higher electrical fields. But everything in the universe is just electricity. And we call it magnetism when it's devitalized, but it's still electricity. We call the radiative side, it's the feminine side. And the contractive side is the positive, masculine side. It's a balance, and it's never been anything but that balance, and we've complicated it with a lie.
If you're right, so many people are wrong.
Everyone's wrong. Oh, well, the universe backs me up, and I have the proof of it. You have all these physicists that's saying something different, but none of them have 97 patents. None of them have introduced a new form of flight with unlimited midair bonding. None of them have discovered 4 supersymmetrical systems. This is what we've done. This is what the collective is able to do when you put yourself into the divine space. Because that spirit is waiting. It's just like, okay, are you going to make yourself available for it?
So let me ask you this. If I had a magic wand and I allowed you to not just show this, but allowed all of these people that have these opposing ideas, you debate them, you duke it out, you emerge victorious, okay? With this magic wand, and now people go, just listen to Terrence. What do we do?
Well, then we write new axioms and new postulates based off the real wave conjugations. Now we adjust our understanding of our physics to fit natural phenomena. And then we are in balance with it, and we have to let go of the idea of this currency. We're the only creatures in the known universe that uses currency, that uses an indirect form of payment instead of a direct exchange. We have to get past that point, and that's the hard thing, because this entire world is run on that, and that's where the 1 × 1 = 2 came into its real birth.
Well, the thing about currency is it's connected to technological innovation because of this unlimited potential for growth. And when you have an unlimited potential for growth, you have people that are extremely motivated to make massive amounts of money, and they innovate. in a very high way, and then they also implement that innovation in the form of technology.
But their technology is antiquated compared to mine. There's no government on this planet that has the technology that I have or can outdo what I have, because you can't outdo the fractal.
How many people have you? I know you spoke at Oxford about this, but you didn't speak.
Yeah, they didn't. Oxford did something that broke my heart. 5 minutes before the presentation, they wouldn't allow me to have a screen and show my proof.
Why?
Oh, their computer was down. And I was like, well, you can use my computer. No, we have sensitive things attached to it. I just need the projector. I don't need anything else. Because they didn't want me to go and talk about this. And that's why I went out there and said, hey, pull out your calculator. I talked about acting for a couple of minutes, for 20 minutes. And then I was like, pull out your calculator. And I want you to enter the square root of 2 in there. And let's walk through this loop. That is the square root of 2. I was like, let's walk through this, where the square root of 2 cubed is the same value as the square root of 2 times 2. And then when you divide it by 2 and cube it again, you get back to you take the square root of 2, 1.414213562373095. You cube it, it's 2.828427121746190. Divide it by 2, it gets back to 1.414. Cube it again, is back to 2.828. Divide it by 2, back to 1.414. Here we're taking 1, 2, 3 big steps. We're dividing it by 2, and we get back to the same value as we had in the very beginning. That's a loop. That's x cubed being equal to 2x, which is equal to x plus x. That's an unnatural equation. And every quantum mechanics and quantum physics equation has that square root of 2 in there. We've been living in this lie, this fostered lie, for so long.
And what's the solution to that?
The solution is learning how to multiply volumetrically, how the universe multiplies. And I've already produced all of these things.
Could you explain that, though, to the layperson? How does the universe multiply volumetrically as opposed to the way...
It does not move, does it linearly. It does not walk on. All of our math is based upon a two-dimensional projection. What they do in calculus, they will reduce the action of all things. They'll keep trying to reduce it down to one moment because they believe Newton's first law that everything moves in a straight line, or everything is still until acted upon. They forget that everything is in motion, and that concert of motion is a necessity. They have to include all the other forces involved in order to have equanimity in their equations.
And so how, in a practical sense, does this affect mathematics?
Well, once we let go of Cartesian space and the 90-degree angles, well, picture this. Let's take another practical place. Look at a computer chip. It has all of these 90-degree turns on it, typically, where they run the electricity. Can you imagine running at 186,624 miles a second in one direction, and you hit a wall, and you've got to stop, bounce off of that wall, and then you pick up your speed and you bounce off the next wall, and you bounce off the next and next and the next and the next. How much heat are you building up? How much friction is being built up from the interference in comparison to if it was just spherical, just going around? It would build up no heat. And if you allow it to be spiral, which my patent was talking about, that first patent was talking about, you're able to utilize all that energy so you don't need the cooling systems. You don't need all of this loss or entropy. None of that occurs when you go by universal standards. That's all they have to do is follow what the universe does. We have the contractive side, patented, ready and available. We have the expanded side, patented, worked out already, ready and available, and we've got the Constitution between the two of them.
But how does that affect, in a practical use, if you're using math on a calculator? What is wrong with what the calculator is saying?
The calculator right now is still saying that we're on a linear path, and it's just multiplying things in a compartmentalized space.
So by reductionist viewpoint, by breaking things down to simple numbers, that you really can't just do that.
You can try to do it, but it's like the piano. Remember the piano, the earlier pianos, they had, before they compartmentalized, and everything was, remember that everything in the universe expands as a sphere. Everything. Even music expands as a sphere. But what they did with the piano is they took all the 12 notes and then they just start them all over again instead of accounting for the expansion, that space. So you would never, if you're looking at the periodic table, you would never get to the titanium or to the rubidium or to the cesium because they would all keep it with just the 7 tones. They don't allow for the necessary expansion, so you don't have all of these other isotopes to use because they keep things here. You don't allow your child, nope, you're not going to get taller. I need you to stay just at 4 feet. That's the height. That's how high you can go. You will not be allowed to grow further. And we naturally keep growing and expanding out. So they have to allow that, but their math doesn't allow it because it believes in a 2-dimensional space. And remember, there are no 2-dimensional spaces because in order for anything to be perceived, it has to be measurable. And measurable needs 3 dimensions, but it actually needs 4. It needs your perspective. You are the 4th dimension, and that's what Walter Russell also talked about, that it was 4 things coming together. And that's what woke me back up. And I was like, 4 bubbles meeting. But he still believed in the idea of straight lines. He was still hemmed in by it. And he's right. There becomes a cube sphere. There comes a point where everything comes together. But even, hold on, I'm going to try and pull up.
Is it because that we can create straight lines that we get confused?
We can't create it because even when you look at it under an electron microscope, you'll see all the little curved dots that make it up. There are no straight lines. Like if you look at this.
Right, even in a box.
If you looked at this, you'll say, oh, that's a square right there. Right in the middle.
Sure.
You'll see that square happening right there.
Uh-huh.
But if you look at it from the side, from its real perspective, you see that it's not. The straight lines are an illusion. Again, we are being fooled by our senses because there is no motion in the straight line. So all these homes that they're building, and they keep wondering, why do they keep blowing over? Why don't you make the homes look like a mushroom? Follow the curvature of nature, and you won't have to worry about rebuilding them in hurricane zones or in tornado zones. It'll go right over it. They don't make airplanes that's just a straight box. They've allowed it to be aerodynamic and curved. They moved away from the straight lines in that aspect. In boats, they don't have the Noah's Ark moving across like it's, they don't do that. Like I said, no man would be attracted to a Cartesian woman, to a Euclidean woman. Something just straight like this. We need the curvature, like Alan Watts said. We need the wiggles. We like the wiggles attached to it.
Yeah, that makes sense about homes.
Why
Does.
do they keep making them flat when and they keep getting blown over? I don't know what the fuck.
Because they're easy to make.
They're easy to make, but it's easier to make the curved ones. It would be much simpler to do it, but all of our technology is built on these bricks of the platonic solid. So now we have new building materials with what I've introduced. Entirely new building materials that we can use that have proven, and it's super symmetrical, that you don't have to just stay with the rectangle.
Yeah.
You can do anything you want, and you can produce energy. I want to show the magnetic field. We've talked about the electric field. Will you show the video for, it's a light column?
Let me pause real quick. I got to take a leak. Let's pause, and we'll come back to that. So pick it up with magnetic field. We'll know what to do. Okay. Where were we? Magnetic what? There it is.
Yes. So
okay.
This is me taking, this is the feminine side, and me taking 4 of them and stacking them on each other. My wife ran 1 string of lights down the middle of it. But watch as this spins.
What is this that I'm looking at?
I call it a light sculpture. It's my transcendental lighting.
Wow.
A new form of lighting.
This is insane. This looks like a psychedelic experience.
But this is repeating, this is rebuilding and predicting the wave field, the entire wave field of how it behaves. That's what the magnetic field does.
Show me that again, Jimmy.
That's why I call it transcendental lighting, because you could sit up there sober and get taken into an entirely new place. And I just spent it. I have it on a little string at the top, and I just turned it.
Yeah, if you just make one of these and have it rotating on some sort of a engine, people would just trip balls staring at that.
And nobody is, it's like I can completely change the lighting industry. And that's just one of the conjugations. Inside of there, the gift that I gave you, you'll see how the magnetic field bonds, it interacts with itself, how they overlap. If you take those
All
off
the
of
different
there.
ones.
Yeah, take those off of there. That's the electric field. What you have right there, all those are define the electric field, and you see they're contractive.
Mm-hmm.
But inside of there, you'll see that the magnetic field.
How did you make these?
I take acetate, and they might think I take acid. I take acetate, and draw out the flour on it. And I take the pieces of the flour, and then I use a soldering.
So you make all these by hand?
Build all those by hand. So what?
This is crazy.
That right there is the light. If you take that right there, what you're holding in your hand.
And
If you
then this?
no,
This?
take where
This?
6 bubbles meet.
This one?
That is the decay. This is electric, and this is the magnetic side of it. This is that at its decay. This is when the light is expanded out. This is the decay of the light field when it becomes a magnetic thing, a magnetic expression. Light is blue. No, electricity is blue. Light comes out in yellow and red.
And how is this concept of taking these forces and converting them or representing them as these shapes, how is this received?
Nobody has responded to it. They won't. The universities. I went to Morgan State because of a really, really beautiful brother brought me up there to Morgan State because he saw these things. Yeah, no, I'm good. He saw these things, and we set up an entire presentation at Morgan State. Dr. Bardwell, even though we've got 3 papers that's been peer-reviewed, the geometry of the proton and the tetryon, that's been peer-reviewed. He said there's no way this guy knows any of this stuff. And so he knows any of the things inside of here. So no one from the science departments showed up. So they bust in children from different schools, and I talked to them, and I showed them how the universe worked. And then they brought like 20 PhDs from outside that came in, and I showed them how the universe really behaves. But none of them spoke on it out because what happened to Rupert Sheldrake? When you speak against the established norm, you get pushed outside. You don't get funding anymore.
Well, I think part of the problem is also that when someone defines someone as one particular occupation, and for you, you're a very talented actor. So
I'm an
people,
actor.
you're a very talented actor, my opinion. And
Thank you.
so people think of you in that way and say, there's no way he's awesome at something else too.
Yeah, well, a lot of that happened, like you said, the guy that interviewed you for Rolling Stone.
Yeah,
Eric. I invited him into my home for 2 days, and I walked him through all of these things, but he had an agenda at Rolling Stone. They didn't say Terrence Howard has discovered this, that, and the other. They said Terrence Howard, a very dangerous mind. So you put that kind
Did they mean that in a complimentary way? I didn't read the article, so I can't
It
tell
wasn't
you.
taken in a complimentary way.
So they thought you were crazy.
They took it as crazy.
Right.
And he tells you that I had something serious, but to everyone else, I want to take you guys to something where, you remember Nikola Tesla said if mankind understood the magnificence of the numbers 3, 6, and 9, he would have the keys to the secrets of the universe. If you will go to the linchpins bonding.
Can I bring you back to the
And then-
Rolling Stone thing though, because you kind of abandoned it? I think.
No, I'm going to show you.
Oh, okay.
I'll show
They have
you
an
on
agenda.
that. They had an agenda.
Yeah.
Because remember, at the same time, they were calling me a wife beater and all of those things. And then I put out the video showing what that same woman that had painted in a black eye. Those pictures weren't made at the police station or at the hospital. She took those pictures herself, and she was blackmailing me for years because I had, when we met, I was studying to be a Jehovah's Witness. I was trying to do all those things. So we weren't having any sex or any of that stuff. So we got engaged, and I bring her to my home in Philly, and I had this tape because anytime I had interactions with somebody, I'd heard that Louis Armstrong recorded everything around him. Same thing with Marlon Brando. I recorded all his interactions with people. So I was recording things, and if I'd had phone sex with some girl, I was recording that. If we were having sex, I recorded that because I wanted to make sure there was proof of, if anything happened.
Right.
But I also recorded my mother the last 2 weeks before she died, and I had that on a dictaphone. And I didn't play with computers at the time. And she was like, why you got this on the dictaphone? I can put it into the computer. I was like, oh, great. And we could keep it forever. Wonderful. You're so wonderful. I go downstairs. I'm cooking some greens. 2 hours later, I come upstairs. All of my dictaphones from the last 15 years, she has downloaded into her computer. And then I was like, no, those are my private things. Oh, no, it's okay. I can just hit delete. And so I was like, okay, great. And then 3 months later, when I tried to break up with her because we had no sexual, there was no chemistry sexually, she was like, you think I erased those things? I kept those. And I know what you've done. And she started with the blackmail. And all I really wanted back was my mother's tape. Where she told me, I know you're going to be okay, Terry. I always knew you were going to be okay. I just wanted my mother's voice back. I paid her whatever money she wanted. She destroyed that. She destroyed my name. But like I said, I thought that was a death blow. But that's what took me back when I had nothing. That's what took me back to this. And that greater being started showing up again.
And you think if that had not happened, you probably would have gone further and further down the world of acting, and you would have abandoned this.
Oh, my goodness. I had, I was doing Iron Man.
Yeah.
Out of nowhere, that gets taken away. We did a 3-picture deal with Marvel, a 3-picture deal, $4.5 million for the first one, $7.5 to $8 million for the second one, $12 million for the third. We signed it. They come back to me the week that my mother dies, and they called my agent, Charles King, he was at William Morris at the time, and they said, yeah, we want Terrence, but we want to come back for $1 million instead of the $8 million that we had agreed to. And my agent had an emotional reaction to a business decision, and he said, F you, and hung up the phone. Well, immediately they go to Don Cheadle.
Oh.
But instead of just doing that, they had to spin, he was terrible on set and all of these things, and went through all this stuff. And I'm calling Robert Downey Jr. I'm calling him because when I was doing the Brave one with Jodie Foster, Susan Downey was a producer with Joel Silver. She comes over to my trailer, and she's like, wow, it's so amazing. Congratulations on Iron Man. It's the first time they've hired the second lead before they've hired the first. But Robert wants to go in there. And they were talking about Clive Davis and all of that. And I was like, okay, great. I'm just moving along doing my thing. And she was like, but Robert really wants to go in, but they won't see him. And I was like, I love Robert. I love what he does. I loved him in Weird Science. I loved him.
Who did they want?
They wanted Clive Davis to play him. Because remember, in the series, War Machine was supposed to take over.
Right.
And I'm like, well, if Robert wants to come in, so I called Avi Arad immediately. He was the producer on it. And I'm like, Avi, I hear Robert wants to come in, but you guys won't even let him audition. He's like, no, we can't bond him. I'm like, instead of the 4.5 you want to give me, why don't you take $1 million for the bond for him? If he gets, and let him audition, and so he gets the part. Robert is like, I love you, thank you so much, da 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 da. Well, when this other thing happened, I'm calling Robert, and he's doing Sherlock Holmes. I called him 27 times, and I'm like, and leave a message. I'm calling his assistant. I'm like, I need the help I gave you. I didn't hear from him until 3 years later. I bumped into him at Brian Grazier's wedding. And then, but at that time I'd had Empire or whatever, and I came back, and he was like, oh, but everything worked out for you. And, that broke me a little bit, but I know how hard Robert had it.
Coming out of jail.
Coming out of that jail. And so if I had to sacrifice myself in order for that, because guess what? If Euclid or any of them had discovered one of the wave conjugations, they would have been happy. I was given not just the one, I was given the entire electric field and magnetic field and the constitution between them. So I was given so much more. And my wife, when she first saw the mirror all shape, if you open it up, you'll see it's right here. My wife looked at this, the feminine side, because that's all I had really gotten to at that point. And she was like, this is what you'll be remembered for, and your acting will be just a footnote. And, she nursed me back to life because I was angry. I was really angry. And I was going to use all of the knowledge that I had, and I was going to destroy mankind. I was like,
Oh my God! Right out of Marvel.
I was like, yeah, I was about to, but then.
Well, I'm glad you didn't.
Now I know I'm here to help mankind. This is, have the universities check out what I'm doing.
Well, it's one of the most fascinating things about this is that it's so easy to ridicule when an actor has something that's outside of acting that changes everything.
But look,
if you were just a person who went to school, became fascinated with these concepts, became obsessed, and made it your life's work, and maybe you acted in college a little bit, no one would care.
No.
But you had become successful as an actor.
As a bad guy.
Yes. And then you'd gone through all that bullshit. So you gone through all that bullshit, and now they're like, no, that guy, there's no way.
Those are threshold guardians, though.
Yes.
It's a necessary step for it. I would gladly trade whatever $100 million I would have made doing that for this right here. What I've been able to do right here. Like I said, when Tesla said if mankind could understand the significance of 3, 6, and 9.5 keys to the universe, will you play that video for me, Jamie? Yeah, the linchpin bonding. I think it'll be, well, there's 3 of them. Yes, that one right there. Now, before we play it, if you count the struts and watch how many struts bond as it becomes this right here.
Okay.
And just count it as it goes. Just let it play. You'll see 1, 2, 3. And we know this is a magnetism because it's expanding in the center. Now you'll see 6 of these bonds. And those colors going across there is basically the periodic table. 5, 6, yep. And then the last one comes in, and now you have your 9. And this is magnetism. Like I said, magnetism expands at the center. So you have your 3, 6, 9, and it's back to that same fractal again. So now what you do, if you will do me a favor.
So when Tesla said that, what did he mean?
He was talking about these numbers, this interaction of these 3, 6, and 9. But this is all of them coming around the tetryon at 120 degrees. This is how they all behave, and this is the fractal because it keeps getting back to these 4 vortices. But now I want to show you after let this go again so they could see it, how all of this is the grand unified field put together. Now I want to show you electricity in this space, which will be the next one. And you'll see 5 linchpins bonding. And you'll see that it collapses the dodecahedron. And that's the release of energy, but it'll still make that same tetrahedral space. Watch. So when I talk about materials engineering now being able to be manipulated, and you could see that the dodecahedron has been collapsed, and these other, because electricity is seeking higher pressure conditions. It's more dense. But we're back to and these 5 will keep bonding with other 5s, building predictable structures, not haphazard things. 4 of these will come together and make a larger tetrahedron. And then those will bond and make larger. This is Jesus walking on water. This is the proof in the pudding. They don't have this for their chemical engineering programs now. They don't need those models of just a ball and just that little rod anymore. They now have what's necessary. The carbon line is that yellow line in between it. And when we put this in the solar apex and replace the sun with it, it predicts every star on the galactic plane, the ecliptic plane, and the celestial plane. Every single star it predicts, and when we put groups of linchpin, it predicts entire relationships. So now, that's why I said the Heisenberg uncertainty principle is out the window, because now with this combined with the wave conjugations or with the mirror shapes, you can, whether it's expanding or contracting, we can now predict precisely where everything shall occur. And the linchpins I've included all of that into the AI for the linchpins. And the best thing about IBM and all of those other companies, Raytheon, taking my patent and making money off of it, since I have priority, since I invented it, I can now use any innovation that they've done off of my patent and not have to pay them a licensing fee.
Really?
I have priority.
Wow.
So that's why I was like, where's Elon Musk? But they put all that crap out there. And after that doctor did that stuff with the blood thing, they think everybody's a liar. But it's like, I'm not just an actor. One of the biggest things I've done is that patent the AR, VR world that we live in.
Doctor, you mean that Elizabeth,
yes,
whatever her name was?
Yes. But
Yeah.
they think everything is a scam. And then you have the Rolling Stones, you have the Guardian, you have all these people saying these negative things to where people wouldn't take it seriously and didn't even consider it. So I'm like, okay. And in nature, an animal isn't given horns unless it needs them. So our society as humans, we wouldn't be given this information right now unless we needed it, unless it was necessary for our continued existence and survival. We're about to destroy our planet, but with this, you don't need to. You don't need to, because now we know how to use the universe properly, where you can multiply that gun, we get more energy out of it than we put in, which physics says is impossible. And they gave me the patents to it. But nobody wants to have a conversation.
When you think that the origin of hominids, that this is a naturally occurring thing that happens when a planet reaches a certain distance from its star in a Goldilocks zone with the proper materials?
Of course, the pressure conditions created. Look at
So you think this is happening
everywhere.
everywhere?
Everywhere, because everything is alive. Look at what happens in the summer and, in the northern portion. Alan Watts said you'll see apples occurring at this time. They'll say that the tree is appling. Well, what happens with the planets? Oh, it's peopling.
Whoa.
This is just peopling. This is just what occurs at 93 million miles away from the sun.
What do you think occurs after us?
Well, once we get pushed out further, what happens? We need nitrogen to to expand to unwind into oxygen. But since when we get pushed further out, the nitrogen is so far out, so we have to go deeper underground to have the pressure conditions that was equal to us having 93 million miles away from the sun. The deeper underground we go, the less light we have. And as a result of that, skin begins to gray, eyes get bigger. All of those necessary things, the things that we see in aliens and all of that, ends up taking place.
As the animal adapts to changing environment.
Changing pressure condition. We have to change. Why is it that white people are allergic to the sun? Because they've lived inside of a pressure condition where there was not as much sun there. So when they get into this area where there's a lot of sun, now you have melanoma and all of those other issues. But if they're in their natural environment, they don't have any of those problems. Right. So they have to keep recreating their natural conditions that allows them to have homogeneous nature with everything. But we're living outside of nature.
Because we're acting on faulty ideas.
Faulty fundamentals. We're still going with Euclidean straight lines when there are none. And we would rather think we have understanding of the universe at 4% and keep the 96% as a mystery. And we invent all these science fictions. Black holes and dark matter and dark energy and all of this stuff, neutron stars that's spinning so quickly. We invent all of these things because the math is off. Because the math is not based on equanimity and they have renormalization. You know, there's, I'm not going to go down the whole rabbit hole on it, but everything they've been doing. That's why they keep recreating have a new theory for this. Now a boson and a God particle and this, and you have the 3-quark model and the gluons holding them together. And now we have the 5-quark model, and we have all of these extra things that they keep inventing, and they have the CERN collider smashing living things together. Smash, because these protons, they're live. Everything is conscious. There's where's consciousness exist in mankind? Is it in our head, in our body? What's the difference between men or mammals and plant life? Do you think a grain of rice has 54,000 genomes in it? We only have 26,000. Who is more evolved? But what's the difference between us? If you, Jamie, could pull up I have a picture showing hemoglobin and chlorophyll. And you're going to notice that the hemoglobin has the same exact combination of carbon and hydrogen that we have. The only difference they have is the center of theirs is magnesium and the center of ours is iron. That's the only difference. You put a cephalopod up there, it will be copper. The same interaction of So where does consciousness occur? Where does the sentient being? Is it just in the iron, or is it the magnesium deals with the pressure condition? Like with a cephalopod, it has to have copper at its base because of the pressure condition. It's the same experience, just under a different temporal dimension. Change the pressure condition, change the motion condition, you change the organism, it adapts. But it's the same living principle. There's no difference between us and the plants. So when people are chopping down and ripping things off just because they can't hear them scream, it's wrong. So TCOTLC.com, we put all the patents inside of the Center for Truth, Love, and Consciousness. That's what TCOTLC.com means, because I knew that I have a propensity to get angry and get emotional and could misuse this stuff. So we have a board of members that dictate how these things will be licensed out and how they're used. So it's not just on me.
So where do you think consciousness is coming from?
Everything is alive.
Everything is conscious.
Everything is, like, if you take it from the biblical thing, what part of the universe wasn't made from the creator? Did he picks up some other if the creator is eternal?
So we just don't think of them as being alive because they don't move and they don't talk to us.
we don't speak their language.
We don't have the sensory ability to perceive their consciousness.
But we've learned, like if you look at The Secret Life of Plants, they show that they'll take plants of the same mother and father and they'll seedlings and they'll watch the root growth, and because they are siblings, they are moderate in their root growth. But then they'll take the same species of plant but use a different seed from another parent and they're more aggressive in their root growth.
Wow, they're cooperative
They're
instead of competitive.
Yes, when they're in the family. The tree, they'll take radioactive carbon or nitrogen and put it on the leaf of a mother tree, of a fern or of some kind, or fir tree, and they will put isotope or radioactive identifier at its offspring, and you'll see that mother tree is, through the mycelia, is taking that nitrogen and giving it to its youngsters.
Yes. Yeah.
They call out and they speak and they're interactive and
they share resources.
They're alive and sentient because everything is alive. But we see everything as dead because of what the Bible said. Because it breathed into life, and the universe is just one big nothingness of dead. There's nothing dead in the universe. Everything is alive and everything is a piece of God. So when we do good things, then God is considered, God is good. When we do bad things, God works in mysterious ways. It's just how we are behaving. And we can all take the conscious level and recognize, okay, somebody's got to do the right thing. And if you do the right thing, the right things happen. And you're going up against the stream of mankind, but I've got the entire universe behind me. I have the universal phenomenon and observable evidence and data that stands behind it, and 97 patents and trademarks and copyrights and multiple industries that I've invented. Nobody else have ever invented tangential flight and the ability to fly or unlimited midair bonding.
There's also a lot less confidence in the stream of mankind than there used to be. There's much more of an understanding that the stream of mankind is often going in the wrong direction.
Because of the Michelson-Morley experiment in 1887, and because special relativity took off. And that meant, everything is dead. So we have no responsibility to anything. Everything is happenstance. We all got here by one big explosion, and therefore life has no purpose. Nothing has a purpose. And so now we can kill off these things. But they haven't looked at hemoglobin and chlorophyll. They haven't looked and said, okay, wait a minute. Let's do the law of similarities. If A is equal to B and B is equal to C, then A is equal to C. My view is this. If you know one thing about one thing, you know one thing about all things. Find the common factor and either multiply or divide. And that common factor happens to be hydrogen. Everything in the observable universe that we see is 99% hydrogen. Well, now we have the geometry of hydrogen. So now we can manipulate 99% of the universe. And there's nothing we can't accomplish. But they're still trying to make that money.
Yeah, that's the problem. The problem is we're contained and confined by this desire for constant, never-ending growth in money, and to control industries, and to control people's ability also to express themselves, which is a big factor in this strange new world that we're living in, where almost anybody can express themselves.
Yeah.
Things get very weird and slippery if you have been used to being in control for the entire time, and now you can't. And so when an idea like this, if you're correct, this is not just groundbreaking, it's
revolutionary.
It's revolutionary.
This has never occurred where someone has completely destroyed the Ptolemaic model of the solar system. They had 39 different equations of how the planets and all that moved.
And of course, you're going to get ridiculed, which is always what happens. When someone comes along, especially someone like yourself, who again became successful in a different field, and now all of a sudden you're saying this. Like, again, if you were a regular person that didn't have a background, wasn't famous for something else, they'd probably be looking at this very differently.
But no, they still wouldn't accept it because
too hard.
it challenges their entire last 5,000 years
Yeah.
of knowledge. It means that the people, they give all this credit about the pyramids. If those were built by an advanced civilization, and I'm not saying they weren't built by someone that used other things, but I believe those things came initially from 100, 200,000 years ago, and the shape was more like this. But after people had been removed, or the influences of the individuals that made them like this, they now was like, okay, we're just going to make them with straight lines. And they limited themselves to that because they opened up the flower of life incorrectly. They invented straight lines where even God can't make a straight line because of his rules, their rules of equanimity. And
What do you mean
balance.
by 200,000 years ago?
There's over 130 something thousand years worth of water damage under the Sphinx itself.
Where do you get that?
You can look it up on.
Well, I've talked to Robert Schock, who's a geologist at Boston University, and he thinks that there's a lot of water damage on the Temple of the Sphinx, but he doesn't think it's that old. He thinks it's thousands of years of rainfall.
Thousands of years of rainfall.
But that's just after the cutting of the stone, and it's a disputed thing. It's not universally accepted. It's a fantastic theory. But other than that...
Göbekli Temple.
Göbekli Tepe.
Tempe.
Yeah.
You go back there, what they've done with the carbon dating on that in itself is like 13, 14,000 years old.
I think it's 11. It was buried 11, purposely buried, which is the fascinating aspect of it, that the dating is universal through the ground, which shows that it was purposely buried 11,000 years ago. So that would put the construction time previous to that. They don't know, though.
But look at some of the maps that came out of Southern Europe. It's not Southern Europe, Southern Africa.
Right.
That showed Antarctica in its full
Right.
and how it behaved long before they were able to do a number of things they were able to do.
Right, when they didn't really even know it existed until, I think it was...
Those oral traditions go back 100,000 years.
Yeah.
Those oral traditions don't go back, 6,000 or 5,000
So what do you
years.
think happened?
Mankind, okay, let's unpack this. If we are 98.7% identical to simians, right?
Right.
And there's only 1.3% differentiation, who's more evolved? We're consider ourselves to be more evolved. But you look at the simians, they have 48 chromosomes. We only have 46. Where did that change occur? Where did we get this new understanding? And how did we lose two chromosomes, even though we're 98.7% identical and behave just like them? There's that 1.3% differentiation, whether you want to call it the Anunnaki or some other influence that acted upon us. But there's been a change within our DNA and our structure. And we were given, the Sumerians were given their number system. That's where the 1 times 1 equaling 1 came from. And their system of straight lines or the Platonic solid. So my thoughts is the individuals that wanted us here to whatever work, whatever manipulation they did for us, they wanted us to have a system of measurement, but something that could not contradict, not giving us the full picture. So they gave us a limited scope where we can measure small areas, but we would never need the larger areas. We'd never need to be able to move out in space because we were engineered for a particular reason. And those stories, you go right back, every civilization has similar stories. The Hindus have those same stories. The Africans with the Dogons,
Yeah.
I think, same story. All of these stories proliferate around the entire globe in the ancient traditions. But what did the Catholic Church do? They went through all of these areas and destroyed all of those books, destroyed all of that information. Why? What
Just
was
like the
purpose?
Taliban blew up the Buddhist statues.
Why?
Yeah.
Why did we destroy all of the Native Americans, all of their information? What was the purpose of it? There's a dumbing down that's happening.
Well, it's also a forced compliance, right? Comply with the new ideology. Whoever's in control, whether it's the Catholic Church or the United States government in the 1800s that prevented Native Americans from speaking their native language. Yeah. Now, if you're correct with this concept of a sun ejecting particles which eventually over billions of years form planets, and then there's a natural occurrence that happens where intelligent life forms emerge, and that this happens everywhere through the universe, and that there are steps, and that these steps that are past where we are is what we look on the iconic form of aliens with the large heads and the big eyes and the tiny spindly gray bodies. If we go to other planets, and we do, especially with drones, if something knows how to travel here from somewhere else and understands this process, because this process is ubiquitous throughout the entire universe.
Yes.
Everyone, and at a certain level of technological sophistication and understanding of matter itself, especially if they have already figured all this stuff out a million years ago, they would probably want to experiment or even accelerate the evolution, our advancement. And it appears our advancement happens very unnaturally. I think most biologists will agree that the biggest mystery in the entire fossil record is the doubling of the human brain size over a period of 2 million years. It's a very, very, very fascinating point. It's not debatable.
Doesn't it scream manipulation from an external force?
Something, right? Something. It screams something took place, because it's an extraordinary something. And if it's the something that takes place that's responsible for the single most bizarre animal on the planet, the one that can manipulate its environment in a way that nothing contemporary can do, nothing alongside that lives with it in the same timeline is even close. Nothing's even remotely close. It's very, very, very different, but it's also extremely flawed for something that has such a high level of technical sophistication.
Because of our fundamentals.
Because we're still barbaric.
We're
at
still
a core.
Flat. We know the world, the universe, and the world is round, but we're still using flat principles to approach it.
Right. And so if you were a super sophisticated creature from another planet and you needed some particular materials from our planet, and the Anunnaki story is all about gold.
Yes.
They needed gold.
Fixing up the...
Yeah. The idea was that they were going to, and this is all from Zecharia Sitchin's work, right? Mm-hmm. And the idea was that they were going to suspend gold particles in their atmosphere in order to protect their environment.
Because they had abused.
Yeah. They had abused it. And I think there was also some speculation about volcanic eruptions, that volcanic eruptions had probably ruined their atmosphere as well. But they had the ability to do something about it. And the way to do something about it is to mine gold. And that they took us and they created us
from the hominids.
From the hominids. The reason why that's so interesting is because gold is fucking useless 10,000 years ago. Why do you need gold? No one needs gold. If you're surviving, if you're a hunter-gatherer, gold means jack shit to you. Why is it the number one method of currency throughout all human beings, all over the world?
Well, remember... They abandoned. Remember, for a long time, like if you're thinking about Italians, they talk about it's salt, the soul.
Yeah,
it was salt.
Salt for
salt
food, yeah.
was what we used for currency in exchange for the gold.
Right.
So where did the gold come? Why did we have an appetite?
Right.
For it.
Why?
If it wasn't placed into us, if it does not sustain us in any way.
It's very intriguing. It's very intriguing because it doesn't do anything. You can't make a weapon out of it. You can't make a tool out of it. It's too soft. It's
and
excellent
they
for
weren't
electronics.
necessarily doing electronics, but silver is even more conductive. If you want it for electronics, silver is like 17 times the conductivity of gold.
But they weren't even using it for
No.
that. You're right. But they did use silver as well. Silver was also used as currency. But not like gold. Gold's the king. Always has been. Gold is number one.
So why do we love it? Why do we need it? Why do
have
we trade life for it?
Always. Why have people like risked their lives traveling across the sea with wooden boats filled up with it to the point where they sink? And then we find these fucking bones, these dead soldiers, surrounded by gold coins. It's crazy,
One
right?
of the greatest things about the linchpin is it's also submersible. So one of the main points is, I'm about to build 5 smaller ones. The only thing that I'm missing right now, because we have built a ton of, we've got like 20 different prototypes that.
So when you say submersible, you mean transmedium?
No,
like
transmedium. They can go underwater.
Like these UAPs.
Yeah, but no, we can go underwater and be able to go now.
To maneuver through the
and
water.
be able to grab. They can identify where that gold is.
Oh, God.
And now they can go down and pull it up themselves without even informing the governments about it. I don't need any of that other stuff. And I think that's why this has been suppressed. When I first took it over to Raytheon, I have these 2 test pilots, both colonels, been there for 30 years, one at Boeing, one at Raytheon. He said, the people at Raytheon said, let's see if he can keep it. They didn't know I had all these other patents surrounding it that they had no idea, but its usage, if they use it, the world changes in a beautiful way. If they ignore it, we cease to exist because we'll continue down this wrong path.
So do you think that intelligent life in all places of the universe has figured this out already?
If they're traveling here, they have, because you don't use power to go from one place to another. You decouple from the electric pull. You decouple from the Earth, and guess what? The Earth pulls away from you at its speed. You decouple from the solar system, it pulls away at its speed. You decouple from the galaxy, it pulls away from you. That's all you really need to do, but they didn't know how to decouple. In 2 years, I won't need props anymore. I'll use molecular excitation, which is all inside of the patents that I've put in there.
So one of the things about this whole back engineering thing that you keep hearing about with UAPs, the back engineering, is gravity propulsion systems. Is that there's a system, this is what Bob Lazar talked about, there's a system that uses a stable element called element 115 that was just theoretical until they discovered that it actually exists in a particle collider in the 2000s. So he was talking about this in 1989. And what he's saying is that there's some sort of stable element that gets bombarded with electricity and it creates this gravity wave.
That you can do that, or you can just, like with music, use a discordant tone. And those tones will push away. There's a particular tone that the Earth is on. There's a particular tone, the key of A. It's 432 hertz, the Schumann resonance. All you have to do is have the opposite tone to that, and it will be pushed away from it. You don't, the same way a bubble at the bottom of the ocean doesn't use any energy to get to the top. But because it's completely in opposition to its environment, the environment pushes it away. That's what you do if you're an intelligent race. You can use an oar. If you're trying to swim across the ocean, you can get across there. But an intelligent species, like Alan Watts said, will use a sail. And they'll tack and make their way across. You use the energy. That's what judo is. It's supposed to be the Tao way, which is the Wu way, which is not forcing anything. And the Japanese just say judo in a harsher sense, but it still means using the energy of your opponent against it without expressing unnecessary energy. So you just use the equal and opposite forces of tones. You can do all of this stuff with tone. You don't need to use any electricity beyond creating the frequency. That's what the Beatles use, not the Beatles, the singing group, but those Beatles that they have in the Scarab Beatles, and those people that were doing those experiments with it. That's what these shapes, used properly, vibrated properly, It's a levitation.
And so that would be the method of propulsion.
Method of propulsion and also decoupling.
And so it wouldn't show a visible means of propulsion. Just like these UAPs don't show visible means of propulsion. They don't have a heat signature.
No.
So they'd be operating on something entirely different that's allowing it to propel. And then you could figure out how to manipulate that how.
Take the frequency of the Earth and find out what's the equal and opposite tone to it. Wrap your ship in there.
And how fast could this thing go?
You decouple from the Earth. You move at, what's the Earth moving? At 1,000 miles an hour or so? Takes 24 hours for it to get around.
Mm-hmm.
You know, how quickly is our solar system spinning? Yeah, whatever that tone, whatever that frequency is, whatever that speed is, you decouple from the solar system. Now the solar system moves away from you.
So in that sense, you could move at insane speeds and not experience G-force.
No, nothing whatsoever. And that's what the linchpin or the angles of incidence allows, because now we can decouple from these 6 relative positions.
So when we feel about G-force, like when you're have you ever flown in a fighter jet before?
Yeah.
You feel those insane G-forces. Like, what that is the resistance of the Earth itself.
Of the Earth.
Of the spin of the Earth itself.
Of our centripetal place where we are with the, remember the Earth is spinning.
Uh-huh.
The solar system is spinning and acting a force. The galaxy is spinning and acting on it.
So
and
there's
now the
all
planet
these forces
force is
pushing
pushing
down.
in. So if you decouple from them,
then you have no force pushing you through, and you can essentially travel instantaneously to anywhere if you have the right frequency.
the right frequency, it's all frequency. It's all frequency. And the right angles of incidence. You can't get there with Cartesian space or Euclidean 90 degrees, 45 degree things. You cannot get there. You have to have the truth. And that's why I think I was given all of these things. It's like, hey, let's stop destroying the planet. You don't need oil to do all of the things you're doing. You know, we can now take, right now we're writing a patent. I'm working with Jeff Yee, another mathematician that we worked, and me and Chris are doing another patent, but we're able to take the radioactive decayed water, the stuff that they're using to cool those rods, and use the proper angles of incidence and the proper field, and can reverse that radioactive decay in days, and not take 100 years in order for it to do. It's just the change of pressure and motion conditions. When I was talking to Jeff Yee about it, he was like, well, we can use neutrinos coming from the sun, and saw that there was a different relationship, like I was saying before, how radioactive decay seems to happen quicker around Venus or closer to the sun. And I was like, is it possible that that's due to the change in the greater pressure condition that's happening, and therefore the electricity is able to have a greater effect upon it? You know, I was like, oh, no, how do you know that the pressure is greater, you know, at Venus? And I was like, oh, you still think there's a void, you know? We'll send a probe there and see how the pressure increases, and send the probe out and see how the pressure decreases. The greater, closer to the sun or the apex or the primary, the closer to it, the higher the pressure. The further away, the less the influence. Your child, my child, you get my child around me, I've got a great deal of influence on it. And he behaves the way I expect him to behave. You take him outside, you know, to a theme park, and I'm not there, they run crazy.
Right.
Because I'm not there to act upon them. So
Right.
you can use that for propulsion at the same time.
I feel like we could do 100 of these podcasts, but I think we should wrap this one up. We just did about 3 hours.
I saw when I was looking at a lot of your stuff, I was like, damn, he'd be sitting there talking for 3 damn hours.
You just flew
What
by.
are they talking about? But we haven't even covered half of these things.
Let's do it again.
I would love to.
Let's do it again.
But if you, like I said,
I'm very interested to see how this is received, and I'm very interested to see, because I'm sure there's going to be a lot of people that want to be able to talk to you about this.
I'm leaving those things with you.
Beautiful. I'll keep them
just
right
so
here.
that you can, and if you go into my book, you can walk through and I explain.
I'm going to listen to this
all of
podcast about
stuff.
30 times just to try to get a slippery grip on any of it. But
Thank you.
I really appreciate you, man. I really appreciate you're a very rare person.
You too, man. You made the challenge. There's one question I want to ask you before
Okay,
you go.
sure.
While you were on Fear Factor
Yes.
and you watched people making choices for that gold,
Yeah.
what was your consensus about human nature in comparison to what dignity and integrity should move somebody to do in comparison for chasing that gold?
Well, I think for a lot of people, first of all, what happens is first the show becomes famous, right? So the show gets on television. Initially, people do it because they want to be on television. Then the show becomes successful, and people do it because they like it. They watch it at home, and they wonder if they could do it. Could I do that? Like most people say, the physical challenges, like those would be interesting to me, but man, I can't eat bugs. I can't do that. A lot of that's in your head. And it's like anything. It's just a challenge to see if you could overcome your natural instincts. And like I ate a roach. It was nothing. It's no big deal. I ate a bunch of things.
I ate a cicada.
I ate a cicadas are actually good. Like people cook them. And by the way, you should cook them because there's a giant hatch about to go down right now. And they were just showing images of these things coming out of the ground because it's like a 13-year cycle.
Yeah.
And there's billions of them. And you eat them. They're delicious.
A great source
apparently.
of protein.
Yeah, they're a great source of protein. People got to get past the idea of eating bugs. But so then people started doing the show because they wanted to see if they could do it. And, some people are in credit card debt. They're young. They want to take a chance. It might be fun.
Yeah, but it's at the end of the day, there's a certain amount of self-respect that comes up to it. Like if I'm forced to eat a slug or something of that nature, if I'm on like Naked and Afraid, it drives me crazy because they don't even get paid for it. They go out and get these parasites and for life that changes them for life, and it's just for the freaking experience. No, that's why we put on clothes. It's
the clout. They want to be on television. People want to be on television so bad.
And I think being on television is the worst thing that has ever happened. I feel like an emotional whore, because they don't appreciate that I'm tapping into something sacred, some sacred emotions, and I'm just turning tricks for Johns, turning tricks. And if I do a great job turning this trick, then they'll do a gangbang with their buddies, literally and figuratively. And that's what they want to do.
They want to make all the money out of you turning your tricks.
Bingo.
Yeah, but the thing is, like, for the person that watches it, it's entertainment, and it's very valuable. Like, wow, what a great fucking movie. You leave, you feel inspired, you want to create. There's positive to it, too. I could see how you could look at it as a negative experience, but particularly you,
the producers,
because you have so much
negative.
more to well, yeah, there's always. You're always going to get pimps.
Yeah, and I love interacting with the people, and I love the growth of that. I love when people say you helped me through a really dark area, because even when I play bad guys, I'm finding I know that bad person is just missing something that it wanted and needed.
Yeah, like all humans. Yeah.
Just a hug, just the right hug, and somebody understanding them. Now, I'm going to leave with this one last thing.
Okay.
I was on a plane once, and I always ask the older people when they're sitting next to me, what's the best advice you can give a young man? I was 33, and this when we were going over to Germany. This will take 1 minute. We were going over to Germany, and I asked this one guy that was like 70 years old, and right at the moment as we were on our way, he said, if you look out the right side of the plane, you'll notice the island of Ibiza. And he got real quiet. And then 5 minutes later, he said, have as much sex as you can now. This is before the advent of Viagra.
Whoa.
And then I was coming back from the Czech Republic, and a few years later, and I asked this man as we got on the plane, and he sat next to me, and he waited until we got all the way near L.A., and as he was reaching up for his bags, he said, what's the best advice you can give a young man so he can be good, have a successful life? He said, you got to remember, in every person you meet, there's a little piece of God in them, and that's who you talk to. And I added to that, but make sure they see it in you first.
Wow.
So that's what my life principle is about. Make way for life. Please make way for life. Find the peace of God in you and show it. Shine through it. Push it, and take up your stake. Take up your stake and be the Messiah for the day. and 2 days and 3 days if you can, and be a rascal also. I discovered half of this stuff while I was still watching porn. It's not like I was some monk. I was still watching porn, and I'd come back and do these. So I was like, okay, it's you. There's a balance.
That's great
there's
advice.
a balance.
That's great advice. That's a great way to wrap this up. Let's do this again. We're gonna do this again.
I would love that.
100%. I can't
Reach
wait.
out to Elon Musk, man. And Jeff Bezos if they want to finish.
I don't know Jeff,
all this,
but I know Elon.
Elon,
right.
I got his solution.
Okay.
We can clean up the upper atmosphere. You know, linchpin is real. It's real. It's there. I can't
wait to see the response to this. Thank you, Terrence.
Thank